Let the roll reflect that all board members were present, a quorum was present. This meeting is being duly called and the notice being given has been duly posted for the time and manner required by law. And at this time, we will retire to closed session. All right, at this time, we'll return to the open meeting and begin our public comments portion of the meeting. These will be public comments related to the June 19th agenda items. And before we get started, I understand we have around 20 public comments, is that correct?
18.
18?
Yes, sir.
So you'll be reduced to 2 minutes today for the expedience and efficiency on your public comments. You have 2 minutes to speak. I'll ask Ms. Taylor to go ahead. For quickness, we're going to read through most of the part and your comment card first, so when you come up, you'll just be ready to start speaking. Okay?
Yes, sir. All right. Good evening, everyone. As encouraged by the Board of Trustees, the Board of Trustees encourages public comment. All public comment at a meeting other than a regularly scheduled meeting should be limited to agenda items posted for the meeting. By signing up to provide public comment at a board meeting, you are acknowledging and accepting the procedures for public comment available online at lovejoyist.net. Any individual speaking or seeking to speak during the public comment session of a regular board meeting must complete and submit the public comment card no later than 15 minutes prior to the designated start time provided on the meeting notice. Public comment cards must be completed in their entirety with accurate and truthful information and must designate whether the speaker is speaking on a specific agenda item. Failure to designate an agenda item relevant to the speaker's comments will result in the classification of the public comment as a non-agenda item comment to be heard at a later time in the meeting. Public comment cards are only applicable to the meeting in which they are completed and submitted by the established deadline. Each individual will have one opportunity per meeting to share their comments with the Board of Trustees, not multiple opportunities per individual agenda items. If a speaker is not present when his or her name is called, the speaker forfeits the opportunity to speak at the meeting. All speakers will be limited to no more than 3 minutes, as our presiding officer stated, 2 minutes at this meeting. The presiding officer reserves the right to reduce the number of minutes per speaker to no less than 1 minute per speaker in order to maintain effective meeting management. The speakers will be recognized in the order in which the person signs up. If there are more speakers than time allotted for public comment, the amount of time per speaker may be reduced as determined appropriate by the Board of Trustees. If time does not allow for you to speak at public comment, the Board of Trustees may allot additional time for public comment or defer specific agenda items to review at a subsequent meeting in an effort to allow more public comment as determined necessary by the board. The public comment card will not be maintained from one meeting to the next and is only applicable to the meeting on which date it was submitted. If you have a specific concern related to an employee of the district or a specific student issue, you're encouraged to utilize the district's grievance procedures provided in board policies DGBA local, FNGN local, and GF local, or applicable grievance process. Each grievance procedure allows for an individual to redress grievances with the Board of Trustees. All relevant policies are available online at lovejoyist.net. Disruptive behavior will not be tolerated in the meeting. If after the provision of a single warning, the disruptive behavior continues, the disruptive individual may be escorted out of the meeting by district officials and/or law enforcement. It is a criminal offense for a person with intent to prevent or disrupt a lawful meeting, to substantially obstruct or interfere with the ordinary conduct of a meeting by physical action or verbal utterance. Once again, the Board of Trustees appreciates your active participation in the school district. With that being said, our first public speaker is Ms. Shannon Ayers. For all speakers, we ask that you state your name and address when you approach the podium. We'll also ask if you have students in the district.
Rodrigo, you're going to be reading the name and address, and then they'll start speaking when it's their time.
Absolutely. Okay, it's Ms. Shannon Ayers. She resides in Frisco, Texas. Her full address was not stated, and she does not have students within our district. Ms. Ayers, your time starts now.
Thank you. Over the past 2 years, CDF has been working across Collin County to rid school libraries of materials that are sexually explicit, pervasively vulgar, and educationally unsuitable. Some districts have been more willing to help protect our children than others, but to date, I've not seen another district go to such great lengths to protect not children, but to protect the sexually explicit instructional materials in your libraries than Lovejoy. As I listened to Ms. Tinsley's presentation at Monday night's board meeting, I was struck by all of the steps that Lovejoy has taken, all allegedly put in place to protect kids from inappropriate materials. You've created language in your EFB local policy that states that library materials shall not include harmful materials. You've developed a process that allows you to quickly identify obscene content. You've apparently been extra diligent since COVID to ensure that all your libraries have met your selection process. And the best part, You've provided a lot of apparently significant professional development on EFB board policy for your librarians and for members of your reconsideration committees that you claim to have, although there seems to be no record anywhere proving that those committees actually exist. And yet, despite all these efforts, the district that you were elected to govern still willfully provides its students access to materials that district administrators themselves have deemed obscene. There is a law that makes this super simple. It's HB 900. It prohibits schools from possessing these books, period. Once a book is deemed inappropriate by a district administrator, it should be removed permanently. I look forward to seeing how each of you vote today. The public deserves to know how committed you are to providing filth to your students. Thank you.
All right, our next public comment speaker is Mr. Jason McLaughlin. Jason, as you approach, I'll go ahead and state your name and address, and if your students attend. Mr. McLaughlin resides at 625 Honeysuckle Lane, and I believe that resides in our district, and he does have students in Lovejoy.
Well, I did. I had 3. They're all graduated. Let me tell you a true story. 13 years ago, my youngest was at Hart in grade K. He wanted to be in the talent show, and he was raring to go. He wanted to dress in black and sing Ring of Fire, but the music teacher said, no, that song is about desire. This is a true story from not long ago when this district gave a fuck and would say no. Times have changed.
Mr. McLaughlin.
1261.
Mr. McLaughlin, we're not going to use vulgar language in this meeting. I'll have you continue.
Oh, I think we're going to read a lot of that word. Anyway, I had it just one more time. And related to the number of the counts of that word in the district is 1,261. But yeah, it went down 366. It took a little fall, but it's back on its feet now. It's going to stand tall. We're going to get that word one more time. We're going to have a ball. I wish I could say it, but I guess I can't. Many in this room just want one thing. It's to go back to zero of that word in the schools, just like the good old days. We're asking for all the leaders in this room to have some balls and tell the world there are none of those F words in these halls. The vulgarity count in this district, best we know, is 3,497. I only pray that Jesus does not come down from heaven. Have a blessed day.
Okay, our next public comment speaker is Ms. Valerie Turnbow. As you approach, I will state your name and address, and if your students attend the district. Ms. Turnbow resides at 550 Honeysuckle Drive, and that's in Lovejoy ISD, and she does have students within the district. And your time starts now.
Good morning, and thank you for your time this morning. My name is Val Turnbow. I've been in the district 16 years. This is going on my 16th year. I've had 4 students, 2 graduates, 2 continuing in high school here, and my concerns are with how this district is going about things. I haven't been in front of you but maybe a handful of times, and I am called today because I am so outraged at the bad decisions that each of you are making for our students. The process that a parent has to go through is absolutely asinine. The length that the board should resolve this should be minimal. If Mission CISD can remove 694 books in 5 minutes, Lovejoy can too. You are putting parents through an unneeded, harsh process. The timing of this should not happen. Waiting over 196 days to learn that the material is upheld by a reconsideration committee that we have no idea who is on that committee is ridiculous. Why do we have to wait for us to have these books not in our libraries? This is not the Lovejoy way. Parents historically have been heard. You put together lots of committees, your financial sustainability, your 2030 committee, put together a committee to decide how to make this more efficient for our parents. This is ridiculous. You're wasting our taxpayers' dollars. The smut continues to remain in our libraries. It's ridiculous. Your recent EFB local has me over the moon. I mean, I just cannot understand. It does not resolve any of the issues. We continue to buy, you do not address buying the smut that is in the library, or shelved for that matter. Opting in or opting out is not the best
All
practice.
right, thank you for your time, Ms. Turnbow. Our next public speaker is Jody Bates. Jody, as you approach, I'll state your name and address. Jody resides at 14 Pedro Verde in Lucas, Texas, and she does have students in the district.
Hi there.
And your time starts now.
Hi there, my name is Jody Bates. I'm a new Lovejoy parent, and when we moved here last year, we were greeted by a wonderful ceremony of how wonderful and amazing the Lovejoy School District was. We were very proud to be Lovejoy parents, and we still are. I am disappointed at the books that are allowed in our library and in the summer school programs. If you research Carrie Lovejoy on the internet, it shows that she was an educator. She fought to get books in kids' hands. I think she would be disappointed in the book choices that we are giving our students. If all these profane words are in our books, do we want our kids to be saying that to our administrators and our teachers? I don't think so. So why are we letting them read these words? As a parent, I try to teach my kids that to be an educated adult, use educated words. You don't want your child to say the F word to you. Why would you want to put them in our books? Anyways, thank you.
All right, our next public comment speaker is Sam Lamping. Sam resides at 703 River Ridge in Lucas, Texas, and he attended Lovejoy High School. Sam, your time starts now.
Hi, my name is Sam Lamping, and I am a graduate of Lovejoy High School. Right now, the school board is being asked to consider whether to remove 4 books from the library. One of those books is The Freedom Writer's Diary, which I have read as a result and I'm going to be focusing on. The primary complaint against this book is that it has explicit sexual content. Having read it, I can tell you wholeheartedly that that view is nonsense. The few references to sex that do appear in this book are all purposely light on details and have a clear and unanimous message. Don't have sex as a teenager. The thought that Freedom Writer's Diary could possibly be encouraging the opposite is baffling to me. So, what is this book about? It is about the true story of an English teacher who did everything in her power to help transform the lives of her students for the better, almost entirely by just teaching them literature, and succeeded. It is a story about the very real power of stories to heal trauma, both personal and generational. It is about how literature is one of the best mediums to showcase the basic shared humanity everyone has, and that we do not face our struggles and demons alone. It is about how narratives, both true and fictional, can and do give people the courage they need to improve themselves and their community. Most importantly, it's a story about real people, which makes everything I just said so much more impactful. In a roundabout way, I have to thank the parent that brought this book up for review because they gave me the opportunity to read one of the best books I have read in a very long time, and I read a lot. I think The Freedom Writer's Diary is such an important book that I recommend any high school English teacher in this room to use it in their curriculum. I recommend every single person in this room to read it, including the school board, and especially the parents who want to ban it. Because to try to ban a book that is all about how important it is for children and teens to be reading books is the height of irony and completely disrespects the students who believed so strongly in that message that they collectively wrote this. Thank you for your time.
All right, our next public comment speaker is Terry Satterwhite. Terry? Terry resides at 900 Beechwood Lane in Fairview, Texas. Ms. Satterwhite, do you have students in the district?
I have one. She's going to be in 12th grade.
Okay, thank you. Your time starts now.
Good morning, and thank you for your time. I know I don't have much time, but I wrote a lot. I probably won't read it all, but I am very disappointed. Actually, I better back up. I'm very happy to be a Lovejoy parent as well, and I think it's really done good for my daughter, and I'm really happy that we chose the school district overall. I'm also really shocked because coming from California, we basically escaped the Marxist hypersexualization there, and one of my reasons for coming to this community and to the school was not only it was a great school, and it was more conservative, and I I'm saddened to hear that these books are still in the library, especially after HB 900. I'll read just one from a book called Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. Damn, that was wild. Me and Lisa lying in her bed, all sweaty and panting. We went at it for hours. All right, an hour. All right, more like 15, 20, 10 minutes. Either way, I did the damn thing. This was the first time we ever had sex without protection. I see what the homie mean. I do feel different. I was careful, though, just like I said I'd be. I brushed Lisa's hair back and kissed her forehead. Your boy made me sweat, them baby hairs out. Hell yeah, damn, I missed you. She cuddled up against me. I can't lie, I missed you too. I could tell by the way you were screaming. Well, you know, that's just, it's not the kind of book I would expect to be. If parents really want their kids to read these kind of books, or that had the F word or the C word, then by all means, they could go to the public library or supply it for them. I don't think we're asking to ban all the books, and especially the opt-in would not allow these kids to have access to other books that are not sexually explicit. This is normalizing sex as a teen or as a child, and also unprotected sex, which I don't think is a good thing at all. So I'm hoping y'all do the right thing, and
Thank you for your time. Our next public speaker is Jill Lamping regarding library materials, and she resides at 703 River Ridge in Lucas, and she does have a student in the district. All right, Ms. Lamping, your time starts now.
Thank you. I'm here today to encourage the board to adhere to law and board policies when considering action on these 4 books. I am very concerned about setting a precedent that books can be removed from our library because individual parents or outside political groups find excerpts from them offensive. This is a public school district, and families of all different backgrounds, values, faiths, and parenting styles enroll their children in our schools. The district has given parents complete power to limit the books that their own children can access, so no parent needs to fear that their child will access material they personally find to be inappropriate. The books at issue have been thoroughly vetted and approved by our district review process, and it's been determined they have value and met criteria to remain in the library. They do not contain pornography. They do contain challenging themes and content. There's great value in walking in someone else's shoes by way of reading compelling writing. Yes, some of the books in our high school contain profanity and sexual content. Students can actually learn how to avoid dangerous, compromising situations by reading about the consequences faced by characters in a book. Students can learn empathy by reading about characters who endure abuse or other difficult circumstances. I'm so glad that I read books by Toni Morrison in high school and again in college that provided a window into challenges and abuse, including rape, that people very unlike me have had to endure. Those images teach lessons that stick with us for life. Books like that taught me empathy, and they taught me to be grateful for the privileged life that I have. I know we're going to hear the most graphic, profane lines read aloud for shock value, but taken in isolation and out of context, the overall meaning is lost. These books must be read and evaluated on the whole. Our libraries must remain a place for students to learn, explore, and encounter stories that differ from their lived experiences. If they do not, we are robbing our students of opportunities to grow and to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lamping. Our next public speaker is Kendall Simpson. Ms. Simpson resides at 455 Blondie June in Lucas, Texas, and she does have students in the district. Ms. Simpson, your time starts now.
My name is Kendall Simpson. I'm a resident of Lucas, the mother of 4 Lovejoy students, a lawyer, and a proud member of this community. The outside groups that are here today, they do not know us, they do not represent us, and they do not speak for us. Rather, they are here at the behest of one vexatious Lucas resident. They are advocating that this board disregard the findings of a reconsideration committee as to 4 titles in our high school library. They want you to impose a standard that represents them, not us, that represents what they want the law to say, not what the law actually says. This, the law will not countenance, this, the community will not countenance, and this is not what our board, our school board, should countenance either. I'm proud to be in a district that has adopted one of the most prudent and freedom-accommodating library policies I'm aware of. Opt out of titles you don't want your child to read. Opt in for a particular category of titles. And a multi-tiered reconsideration process exists in which the applicable legal standard that titles align with our current community standards of decency is inherent to the review of a challenged book. The committee is made up of professional educators from our community with training in that particular age group and of parents in our community raising a child in that particular age group. And together, they have concluded that these challenge books are not violative of Texas law, are not violative of district policy, and are age appropriate. When you ask community members to apply the safeguards and the standards you and our lawmakers set for our library books, and our educators and parents answer the call, our community expects solidarity and trust in return. This is the community's majority position. The alternative is to incentivize outside actors to come back again and again and again. They will, in their words, relentlessly pursue a never-ending game of, quote, whack-a-mole. Cowering to fear is not who we are. So anyone who has spoken about these 4 titles and used fear as a means to their ends tells you that these people do not understand our current community values of decency.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson.
They are not us.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson. Our next public speaker is Charlotte Smith. And Ms. Smith is going to speak about the library materials, and she resides at 910 Bentwater Drive in Lucas, and she does have students in the district. Ms. Smith, your time. Yes, sir.
Cut the disruptions. While other people are speaking and we're transitioning, I'm not going to tolerate it. So if you want to continue, I'll identify you and have you removed.
Yes, sir. Ms. Smith, your time starts now.
Good morning. My name is Charlotte Smith, and I'm a proud Lovejoy parent and resident. I have 2, soon-to-be 3 daughters in the district. We started attending here when my oldest was in kindergarten, so I'd consider us lifers. Parenting is really, really hard. Despite this, I recognize that it's the most important job that I have been given and take it very seriously. I won't know if I've done a good job until my kids are well grown and I can look back and say, hopefully, wow, we raised some really good human beings. Here are just a few of the things that we have decided to do in our household to shape the lives of our children for the ultimate good, which might be met with rolled eyes from my children or disagreement even in my own social groups. Number 1, attend church together as a family. Number 2, eat family meals together at least 4 nights a week. Number 3, limit screen time in our home. Number 4, no cell phones for a long time. Number 5, no social media for a long time. Number 6, tight control of sleepovers. Many of these things are not the same decisions other families make, but we discuss as our family why they're important to us. My husband and I made these decisions for my family. I do not and would never rely on a governmental entity to dictate what my family's morals and rules should look like. That being said, I don't appreciate outside entities and politicians coming into meetings like this to tell me what information I can and cannot access for myself or my children. Is that liberty and freedom? They will have you believe that by not encouraging the banning of these books, it means I read my kids porn as bedtime stories. This is a ridiculous notion. I support laws and regulations. I support the extreme effort our board, admin, teachers, and community volunteers have taken to follow both the law and our own district policies on how to manage questions on materials in our schools. I trust and am satisfied that the hours and hours of work they've done is in the best interest of this community and our children. Our community and the parents of this community are well armed to raise the best humans in Texas, despite politicians and special interest
Thank you,
groups
Ms. Smith.
demonizing the
Our next
education
public comment
they
speaker
participate in.
is Casey Jones. Casey, and she resides at 1355 Rimrock Drive in Lucas, and she does have students in the district. Ms. Jones, your time starts now.
Thank you. Good morning. Today I want to provide alternative thought on this age-old battle that seemingly is designed to take away from the real challenge we have at the state level around public school funding. I also want to share my personal perspective on the library book distraction. Lovejoy ISD already allows and encourages parents to add any books that they do not want their children to access to a list, which prevents them from being able to do so. The district also implemented reconsideration committees to read and review any materials raised into question if they do not meet certain criteria. They will and they have removed books from the library, and as of Monday's board meeting, they continue to add protective measures that enable parental choice. This may not be a popular question, but at what point do we stop blaming the school district and start holding parents accountable for actively parenting their own children? If parents are actively engaged in the children's lives and education, then these measures that Lovejoy ISD has in place should sufficiently protect and prevent them from accessing this material, which they believe to be inappropriate. I have read some of the excerpts that have been posted to social media, and for the record, I would not want my children reading that material either, which is why it is my personal responsibility as a parent to utilize the resources that Lovejoy has already given to me to educate my children on why the material is not appropriate to them. The reality is that most of these children, even at the elementary school level, hold the entire internet in the palm of their hand through either a cell phone or an iPad and can quickly access images and videos that are much more damaging and dark online instantly. It is naive of us to think that the answer is forcing our district to spend countless and costly hours fighting parents over pulling library books and calling it a victory. Unless the people who are intentionally taking time away from the real fight, again, school funding, do not allow their own children to have cell phones, iPads, social media, or play online video games, even at the high school level, then this rinse and repeat argument seems a bit hypocritical and baseless. I now politely ask that everyone please focus their attention on parenting their own children and stop trying to parent mine, because in our house, we consider this a parental softball at best. Thank you.
Our next public comment speaker is Ms. Connie Marshall. Ms. Marshall? All right, and Ms. Marshall is going to speak on agenda item number 8. She resides at 305 Forest View Drive in Lucas, Texas, and she does not have students in the district.
Oh, no, but I did. I've been in this district for 20 years,
Okay, your time starts now.
and I've been a Lovejoy taxpayer and voter for 20 years. And my kids went all through Lovejoy. We didn't move out here until 2004, and we were hoping they would build the high school, which they did in 2006. My daughter was the 3rd graduating class. So I don't know why that keeps being brought up. But I want to state right now, my children had an excellent education here, but it is not the same school district that my kids went to, I can guarantee you. We didn't have to worry about these books. We didn't have them in there when my kids were here. And I'm here to tell you, y'all yourself, the school board, even classifies a certain book obscene and vulgar. But then the reconsideration committee always comes back and says, oh no, it's educational, we're gonna keep it. I'd like to know how using the P word 20 times on one page, eating P, I think you know what I'm talking about, how that is an educational resource material. I just have to know what you learned from that. You know, I just can't quite figure that out. And that was from me and Earl and Dying Girl. Now, y'all said that was a grievance that a parent brought up. It was been on the shelf still if it hadn't been for that. And then the school board said it was obscene, so they took it off. And then they said, oh, it's going to reconsideration committee. Then all of a sudden it got weeded, but we're not sure when it got weeded. And I also find it interesting that the policy was changed Monday night, 2 days before this grievance meeting. I thought the timing of that was quite ironic. And I don't understand why the student might be punished if they check one of these books out. Who should be punished? Shouldn't the administration be punished for having these on the shelves in the first place? Why is the student being punished for that? That makes no sense to me. Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Bridget Adele. Ms. Adele? And she's going to speak on agenda item number 8. She resides at 1235 Scarlet Drive in Lucas, Texas, and she does have students in the district currently. And your time starts now.
I stand here today as a parent of Lovejoy students. My daughter, a soon-to-be junior, is reading 1984 for her summer reading assignment for AP Lang. And here I am on Juneteenth speaking on whether books should be banned in my community. The irony is thick in this room. Boards, you have provided effective solutions for conflicts over books that cause some to clutch their pearls. Those who would like their kids to have access can opt in. Those who would prefer their children not read certain novels, that's okay. Books assigned in class have alternate title options, and yet people still want to limit books further based on their own personal beliefs and political ideals. The 4 books on this list for consideration have been reviewed through our accepted district process. Please do not allow individuals, both inside and outside this community, to try to manipulate you and get you to argue their political battles. It's just, they are here basically to attach the term pornography to each one of you and how you're going to vote. They are here to try to manipulate you. Please do not allow them to do that. Our community has made a decision as a whole. We have agreed with the school district as a whole, and we appreciate y'all allowing the process to do its job. Every generation has novels that cause people to clutch their pearls. When I was a kid, Judy Blume was going to turn us all into whores. I think we can all agree that didn't happen. We have stories that need to be told, whether they are comfortable or not. Our children need to experience things outside of their personal bubble. It's
All right,
healthy.
thank you. And our next public speaker is Ms. Aubrey Stock. Ms. Stock resides at 1615 Lynn Lane in Lucas, and she does have students in the district currently. She will be speaking on agenda item number 8. Ms. Stock, your time starts now.
Thanks. I am speaking against the removal of the books at issue. First, the board does not have legal support to remove these books. Case law, TSLAC's collection standards, and our own policies dictate that the determinations of reconsideration committees must be upheld. The Fifth Circuit specifically called out a school board for disregarding a reconsideration committee's decision and independently removing a challenged book. I urge the board to follow the laws and our policies. Second, like Sam, I would like to submit my personal review of Freedom Riders for the record. I learned about Freedom Riders when I was a student. I remember Aaron Gruelle becoming one of my many inspirations to pursue a teaching degree, and I was sobered by the realities, the true stories of these students' lives. Now, having read the book as a parent, I'm even more resolved about the educational value and importance of this book. We may hear some of the passages where students wrote about their sexual abuse today. As you listen to those words, I hope you will keep in mind that these were actual children trying to speak out about their personal abuse, and to twist their words to fit a label of pornography is wrong. As a mother of 4 daughters, I appreciate the bravery of these young women in the book that spoke out, and in one case reported their abuser. I believe the majority of our community would also agree and would never discourage or remove a victim's story, especially when that victim is a child. Finally, I would just close with my full support of each parent's choice in determining what content is suitable for our children. I may not always agree with the legal standards of what is appropriate. They may not align with my personal standards for my kids, and that is why both the school district's options to opt in to young adult fiction and also opt out of specific titles, such as a nonfiction book like Freedom Riders, that are extremely important because we as parents deserve that choice, each of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stock. Our next speaker is Cynthia Broge, and I apologize if I butchered your last name. She resides at 960 Patrian Court in Fairview, Texas. Cynthia? Okay, last call. All right, and you forfeit your right to speak. Our next public comment speaker is Tyler Simpson. Mr. Simpson will be speaking on agenda item number 8. He resides at 455 West June Road, and he does have students in the district. And your time starts now.
Good morning. I'm a resident of Lucas, parent of 4 kids in the district, and I'm a business and trial appellate lawyer here in town. I've got First Amendment experience before the United States Supreme Court, and I'm here to offer my legal opinion on the risks to the district if it bans these materials. As one of our prior speakers mentioned, a large part of the Readers Act has already been enjoined by the conservative Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. This was not something that was done for political reasons. It was authored by a former Texas Supreme Court justice and prominent conservative legal jurist. And although it concerned a different aspect of the law than what's at issue here, the same vagueness problems apply. A prominent politician's involvement in this banning effort makes this effort appear ideological, not for pedagogical reasons, especially given that district employees and volunteers in the process have already okayed the books at issue. Each one of you, if you haven't read the book and you decide to ban it, the first question I would ask if I was a lawyer in your deposition, did you read the book before you banned it? If you didn't, it's going to appear ideological and political, not for pedagogical reasons. And there's a prominent lawsuit down in Florida in a federal court before a Trump-appointed judge where challengers to the board's decision to ban a book actually ended up sustaining claims against the school district. So keep that in mind. One other thing I want to point out is Representative Patterson's involvement in this. Do not defer to his judgment. He's come to our community and said terrible things about our district, including that he said that you, our board members, are, quote, weak leaders who bow and hide behind leftist lawyers. Don't give in to his political pressure. Do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public speaker is Lee Moore. Lee? She will be speaking on agenda item number 6, and she resides at 1840 Hammerly Drive in Fairview, Texas. Ms. Moore, do you have students in the district?
No.
Okay, thank you. Your time starts now.
I'm here as a CDF non-political volunteer and a friend of Laura. I'm going to talk about the instructional resource that apparently will enrich or enhance the TEKS curriculum because it was sent back to the schools after first being deemed as unsuitable by the assistant superintendent. 19 Minutes by Jody Picoult, which is about a bullied student who resolves his anger by killing 10 of his classmates, where he provides the instructions of his step-by-step how-to process to become that school shooter. Maybe the instructional part of the book is the triple X-rated graphic sex scenes in the book. Josie could have stopped him, but Matt shifted his weight and came down on top of her. He started to move faster, bucking against her like a fish released from a hook on a dock. He was inside her, pumping so hard that she scooted backward on the carpet. Semen, sticky and hot, pulled on the carpet beneath her. Is that instructional material? Or is it when the girl becomes pregnant? And this book explicitly describes home abortion options, to how to research it, including recipes like some she already knew, the old wives' tale about sticking a knitting needle up inside her, or drinking laxatives or castor oil, using a teaspoon of the dried herb per cup, half a cup, 3 to 4 times a day. Don't confuse tansy with tansy ragwort, because that's fatal to cows. Think about this, board members. Would you want your own child stumbling across this book for the triple X sex scenes alone, let alone if it were struggling from being bullied or, God forbid, pregnant and trying to use one of these home remedies? My gosh, this book describes fetal murder, and your flawed process is almost always sends these books from your first step, and then it sends them back into the schools. Do you want that on your conscience? Young minds can't process these concepts. You have the power to change the process. Remove these books.
All right, thank you. And our next public speaker is Amy Gatlin. Ms. Gatlin, and she resides at 1806 St. John and Allen, and she's speaking on agenda item number 8, and she does have students within the district. Ms. Gatlin, and your time starts now.
Thank you. My name is Amy Gatlin. I wanted to share about the book Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. I was first introduced to Angie Thomas when my twins were in a public magnet school for 6th to 8th graders that was very diverse. There was a book club for students that was hosted by teachers, and they were reading the book, The Hate U Give. This book told the story of the reality of many students my kids went to school with. The main character in Concrete Rose is actually the son of a character in The Hate U Give. So the main character, Maverick, tells the story of growing up without his father. His dad is a gang member and is in prison for dealing drugs. Maverick takes us through a cautionary tale about teen sex and how it only takes one time to get pregnant. When the paternity is confirmed, the baby's mom is battling postpartum depression and abandons the baby with this 17-year-old boy. We hear how hard it is to be a teen dad. Maverick's son makes him reevaluate his life. He realizes he has to be a man and be there for his child. He wants to be the dad he didn't have. There is a scene that describes the sexual encounter, and it is not graphic, as you have heard from another speaker's quote, and it does not describe intercourse. They both reflect on their choices about how they were so stupid not to use protection. This is a conversation that should be a part of our culture, teaching our kids the consequences of their actions. This is a story of redemption. Maverick gets a job, separates himself from the gang members that he grew up with. He is determined to do better and be the dad his kids deserve. He will beat the odds. There is some language that some may find offensive, but this language is in PG-13 movies, and most of it's seen on regular TV. There is drug and gang content. Maverick makes a stand against both drugs and gangs and gives insight. The book teaches valuable lessons about consequences, responsibilities, separating yourself from things that don't benefit you, and making goals for the future. I question why this book is on the...
Thank you, Ms. Gatlin. And our last public comment speaker is Davika Dandona. She will be speaking on agenda item number 8. Resides at 1010 Three Oaks Drive. And Ms. Dandona, what city or town is that? I'm sorry.
Fairview.
Rodrigo, can
Yes,
you
sir.
repeat her name, please?
Davika Dandona. And she does have students within the district, and your time starts now.
Good morning, guys. First, thank you for being here. I want each of you to know how much you are appreciated. I don't want to be there, but I do support you guys a lot. You know, I have all this written out, what I want to say, but I think the main thing I want to say as a community member here is, what are we doing? Like, this is the best use of our school board's time, our school district's resources. Like, what are we doing? There is an opt-in process, there's an opt-out process. If you don't like something, if you don't want your children to read it, then be an active parent and opt in or opt out. You know, I can say that as a minority in many aspects of my life, I don't necessarily agree, or what is the majority rule or thought process does not necessarily match with what my home thoughts are and what we teach in our house. But I deal with it. And here, in this option, you guys have given the citizens here and the community members here the option to opt in or opt out. That's more than, you know, most people have with many things that are forced upon them in life. There's a lot of sensationalism that is going on here. A lot of people want to read passages out of a book and say they're porn, and then they want to attach your name to them. And I want to tell you that nobody here believes that. Nobody in this community believes that, or the majority of this community doesn't believe that. You represent us, the community members here, and I think you have heard, and through email, through conversation, through everything, that what you have done represents this community and what we want. Please do not give in to this sensationalism. I appreciate each of you, and I have raised my children besides many of you. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much. President Owens, Board of Trustees, Superintendent Cordell, that's it for our public comments today.
All right, thank you for that. Our next item tonight is this morning is item 6, our Level 3 appeal of library materials filed by Laura Giles. At this time, members of the board, we will move to agenda item 6, which is to hear and consider a Level 3 appeal filed by Ms. Giles. Welcome, my name is Barrett Owens. I'm president of the board. For the record, today is June 19th, 2024. The board is convened for the purpose of go ahead and bring the grievance parties forward, please. The board is convened for the purpose of hearing a Level 3 appeal brought forward by Ms. Giles in accordance with board policies FNG Legal, FNG Local, and EFB Local. This proceeding will be transcribed by audio recording to ensure that an accurate record is kept. The portion of the proceedings in which the complainants and the administration present their statements will be recorded by audio. The board's consultation with its attorney, if needed, will not be recorded. For the record, each person is asked to state their name, reason for attendance, and relationship to the compliance, if applicable, and we will start with our board members. Marvin, if you don't mind.
Marvin Bobo, Board of Trustees.
Jason Janes, Board of Trustees.
Julie McLaughlin, Board of Trustees.
Jeff Wood, Vice President, Board of Trustees.
Barrett Owens, President, Board of Trustees.
Katie Cordell, Superintendent.
Amy Smith, Secretary, Board of Trustees.
Mark Willis, Board of Trustees.
Laurie Tinsley, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction.
Katie Anderson, Attorney for District Administration.
I'm Janelle Davis. I'm Ms. Giles' attorney.
Laura Giles.
All right, thank you. At this time, I would like to instruct all participants to please avoid talking when another person is speaking so that the record will accurately reflect the proceedings. Further, please endeavor to make your oral statements as clear and complete as possible. Remember that the audio recording will not reflect gestures or any other form of nonverbal communication. The hearing will be conducted as an administrative presentation in accordance with applicable policies and laws. This is not a formal legal proceeding, and no strict rules of evidence or procedures will apply. This hearing is an appeal to the board regarding a parent's grievance. Each party will have an opportunity to make its presentation to the board. The parties will not be permitted to cross-examine each other. There will be an opportunity for members of the board to ask questions. However, the members of the board are not subject to questioning by administration, complainant, legal counsel, or any witness. This is an appeal of the Reconsideration Committee's review of 4 books that were in the library at Lovejoy High School. The board's review of Reconsideration Committee's determination regarding the novels Concrete Rose, The Poet X, Unravel Me, and The Freedom Riders is based on the record and information submitted at the prior levels. The board's scope of review is, 1, whether the policy set forth in Board Policy EFB Local in selecting and reviewing the library material at issue was followed, and item 2, whether the Reconsideration Committee's determination was supported by the substantial evidence presented. The board's determination today is not to endorse the view of any one library material, but to solely focus on the selection criteria adopted by the board. Library materials were reviewed as a whole and not in part by the Reconsideration Committee. Pursuant to Board Policy FNG Local, complainants arising out of similar circumstances shall be consolidated. The appeal of the Reconsideration Committee decisions are for reasons and are consolidated for purposes of this hearing. However, at the conclusion of the conference, each appeal will be voted on individually. Because this is an appeal of the prior decision of the district, Ms. Giles will present their argument first. This presentation will be followed by the administration's side. Both the complainant and the administration will be allocated 15 minutes. I understand I have a request for additional time. I'm willing to give up to 20 minutes, and I will give the same to you if that's appropriate.
I mean, just for the record, so folks in the room know, I mean, I asked for 30. Ms. Giles was forced to come in 4 separate times on her level 2s.
We have all the stuff presented in writing. We've read it all. 20 minutes will be the max that I'll grant you.
I understand that. Understood. Can I reserve some of that time for rebuttal to the district's comments?
Yes, how much?
8.
8 minutes reserved. Perfect. Thank you. Amy, did you note the 8 minutes in your? Okay, thank you. Would you like to reserve any time?
Yes, please, 5 minutes.
5 minutes for administration, Amy. All right, so we'll go with 20 minutes. If either party wishes to reserve, you've already done that. Let me move. I encourage both parties to be succinct as the board received the entire review, the local record, and thoroughly reviewed all documents prior to today. There is no need to include repetitious arguments or read excerpts. Rather, please provide the most salient points to the board in your arguments. Does anyone have any questions as to how this hearing will be conducted?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay. Now that we have reviewed the procedure for the hearing, it's time to determine the qualifications of the board members to hear and consider this matter. If any board member feels that he or she cannot do so, the board member should state at this time and not participate in the hearing. Do I have anyone that needs to not participate? All right, let the record reflect that each member of the board present has indicated that he or she can consider the information presented at this hearing and make a decision in a fair and impartial manner. Ms. Giles, who will be making the presentation on your behalf?
Janelle Davis.
All right. Ms. Davis, you have 20 minutes to make your presentation. Actually, you have 12 since you reserved the 8. The Secretary of the Board of Trustees will keep the time and will indicate when you have approximately 1 minute left, so we'll let you know at 11 minutes.
Okay.
You may proceed with your presentation at this time.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. You know, I'd not really planned to focus a lot on the content of the books that we're talking about today because you do have the materials and you can look at the content for yourselves. But I do want to mention a couple things since it came up in public comment. Ms. Giles is not saying that lessons can't be learned from all books, okay? That's not why we're here. Obviously, there are some lessons that can be learned from every book. But I want to tell you specifically with respect to, for example, Concrete Rose, and I bring this one up in particular because a public speaker was interrupted for using the word fuck, and that word is in that book 16 times. So please help me understand how it's okay for that book to be in our libraries, available to minors, but he can't use that word in a boardroom full of adults. It also includes multiple other explicit words, over 200 or so times.
So there were also some comments made about the importance of letting kids read stories of abuse, as if their knowledge of sexual abuse will somehow make it less likely for children to be abused. Ms. Giles and I sit here today in front of you both as victims of rape, and we both would submit to you that letting students read books about rape and sexual abuse desensitizes them to that content. It does nothing to protect them from sexual abuse. The issue somehow of funding came up in the comments, which I find interesting because you pay your superintendent $250,000. You're paying for at least 2 attorneys to be here today. You've paid for administrator time for 9 months jerking this woman around on these 4 books. So funding doesn't seem to be an issue in some circumstances. And I would submit to you that to the extent there are taxpayer resources being wasted here, they're being wasted because of your policies. And of course, we heard the tired tropes about book banners, clutching pearls, and how the irony is really thick about what we're here for today. But first of all, these things are all just wrong. First, we're not trying to ban any books. We're trying to keep harmful material out of the hands of children. And the reason we're trying to do that is because it is the law. So anybody's opinions about whether we're trying to ban books or whether we don't want quote-unquote porn in front of kids are irrelevant. HB 900 is the law, period. And this district is not complying with it. HB 900 prohibits schools from possessing harmful material as defined by section 43.24 of the Texas Penal Code. It prohibits schools from possessing sexually explicit material, which is defined as material that describes or portrays sexual conduct in a patently offensive way under section 43.21 of the Texas Penal Code. It also permits schools to remove materials that are pervasively vulgar or educationally unsuitable. As I said a second ago, that is all that matters. The opinions of everyone else in this room about what the law is, whether it should have been passed, the content of the books, etc., are irrelevant. You are duty-bound to ensure that Lovejoy ISD is following the law. Instead of doing that, however, your district has put up roadblock after roadblock to any parent who raises concerns about the content of materials that is available to minors in your school district. The process itself is a waste of taxpayer resources, administrator time, and it's intended to frustrate and wear down parents. It has taken 9 months to get to this point over 4 books. At the end of August of last year, Ms. Giles submitted a list, or tried to submit a list of over 100 or so books that are violative of HB 900, and tried to just ask the district to get those out of the libraries because they did not comply with the law, and she was told she needed to do each of them individually. And here we sit 9 months later over 4 books. Do the math on that. We'll be here till my kids graduate from school. For the 4 books at issue today, under the district's expedited review process under EFB local, a district administrator and librarian determined that the books should be removed because they met the definition of harmful material, were obscene, or were pervasively vulgar. Under HB 900, that means that Lovejoy ISD cannot possess them, period. Nevertheless, the books then went through a reconsideration committee process, which, by the way, we have yet to see any evidence actually exists, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But this supposed committee then decided to keep the materials despite the prior determination that they were harmful material, pervasively vulgar, and/or obscene. This makes no sense. I expect the district will tell you that this determination by the reconsideration committee was made after a quote-unquote full review or reviewing the books in whole and not just considering specific excerpts. But you should ask yourselves and them 2 questions to that. Is that what HB 900 requires? And number 2, how does adding more words to pervasively vulgar content make it not vulgar? Do non-vulgar words somehow cancel out vulgar ones? The math is simply not mathing on that, quite frankly. In most instances during this process that Ms. Giles has followed for 9 months, the district temporarily removed a book under the expedited review process that I mentioned. The reconsideration committee, again, if it even exists, then kept the book. Ms. Giles appealed that decision through the grievance process. But behind the scenes, in many instances, the district then weeded those books from the library through the quote-unquote normal course of its weeding process. This was never communicated to Ms. Giles. The supposed reconsideration committee dog and pony show proceeded on for a book that was not even in the libraries anymore. When Ms. Giles then submitted public information requests to try to find out what books have been weeded, because we don't need to be sitting here for books that have been weeded. That is a total waste of time. She tried to find out what books had been weeded, so she didn't have to waste folks' time with that, and the district tried to charge her over $3,000 for the information, which I'm sure you're all very well aware of, because that is when Representative Patterson got involved and tried to pay the public information request fee for her. Third, I want to point out that district level administrator and librarian under this expedited review process under EFB local are making a determination about materials, and then the reconsideration committee is using a different standard that does not comply with HB 900. Once that district level administrator and librarian determine that a material meets any of those definitions I mentioned under HB 900, you cannot have it. It doesn't matter what I think, what anybody else thinks, you can't have it under the law. On the reconsideration committee point, I want to mention, one of the speakers in public comment mentioned knowing folks who sat on the reconsideration committees, which is interesting because public information requests have been submitted multiple times to try to learn the composition of those committees, who's on them, when are they meeting, how often are they meeting, and we have been told that no such responsive information exists. I also want to mention the policy that you all adopted on Monday night, and I was not here for that, but I did listen to that portion of the meeting, and I got to tell you, it was interesting that the TSLAC standards about parental authority were quoted, and you guys all patted yourselves on the back for giving parents the authority to make decisions for their children, but conveniently ignored the part of the standards where TSLAC states you can't have sexually explicit material in your libraries. It doesn't matter if a parent wants to opt into it or not. The new opt-in policy adopted this week does not comply with the law. If materials meet certain definitions under HB 900, you can't have them, regardless of whether a parent wants to opt in or not. If they want their child to read those materials, Lovejoy ISD Libraries is not the place for it. On the point of student discipline under that policy, it's my understanding that hasn't officially been adopted yet, but it is going to be the recommendation of the district that in the new student code of conduct, if a child tries to access or read material in the library that their parent has not opted them into, that student is going to be subjected to discipline. And I gotta tell y'all, in terms of wasted time and resources and paperwork and just nonsense, that has got to be the biggest load of nonsense I've ever heard. You're going to opt students out of discipline for vapes, but you're going to opt them into discipline for materials that you aren't even supposed to have. That makes no sense. Instead of forcing your administrators to comply with the law, you're instead shifting the burden to parents and students and subjecting them to discipline, disruption of their education, etc. More administrator paperwork, more administrator waste of time, because you won't force your administration to adopt policies that comply with HB 900. Giving parents the ability to opt out of specific titles, we heard that multiple times today. We've heard that for the last 2 years, however long we've all been having this discussion about books. That is a complete red herring. Again, I've said this multiple times, but that does not comply with the law. If a book or an instructional resource meets the definitions under HB 900 for sexually explicit material, you can't have it. And second, it assumes that parents even know what's available in your libraries or in your online catalogs or in your classroom libraries, which aren't even accessible for parents to search online. They would have to literally go classroom by classroom, library by library, and look at the materials that are there. There are thousands of titles in your libraries. Parents would literally, it would be more than a full-time job to try to figure out, okay, what's there, what's not there, what should I do, what should I not do, instead of simply complying with the law and doing what you are legally bound to do. You have adopted a policy that shifts that burden that is yours to parents. And I'll reserve the rest of my time for rebuttal.
Yes, that was 11 minutes.
All right.
minutes for your rebuttal.
Thank you.
All right. Members of the board, I'm going to ask you to hold the questions, if any, for the conclusion of the presentation by both sides. Who will be making the presentation on behalf of the administration?
I'll do so. Katie Anderson.
Ms. Anderson, you have 15 minutes to make the presentation on behalf of the administration. You've reserved 5. The Secretary of the Board of Trustees will keep the time and will indicate to you when we have approximately 1 minute left. You may proceed with your presentation at this time.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Katie Anderson with Carrington Coleman, and I have practiced school law since 1998, and I am a proud product of Texas Public Schools. Today, I'm very pleased to present the position of the district administration, which is one of respect and appreciation for the board's duty as elected officials in the community to make sure policies you have enacted are both followed and lawful, which I strongly believe that they are. Dr. Lori Tinsley, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, is here to fill in any gaps and particularly to answer any questions you may have. The administration brings the following 3 points for your consideration as you make the important decision. 1, these novels do not in any way meet the definition legally or factually of harmful material, obscenity, or pervasively vulgar as described by law. 2, the district followed the process outlined by the board policy with fidelity. 3, the substantial weight of the evidence supports the reconsideration committee's decisions. As a preliminary matter, the district administration recognizes and strongly affirms that parents are the primary decision makers for their children, including specifically what access to library materials is appropriate for their children. The district adopted an opt-out policy in August of 2022 to allow parents to eliminate student access to any library material that did not align with that individual family's values and morals. The district also took steps to do the following to establish appropriate selection as well as reconsideration processes. They revised the library program handbook to expressly reflect board policy EFB local and the updated selection and removal process. They engaged a more focused library book removal plan that has now been implemented, resulting in a significant number of young adult fiction being removed from the libraries by applying the stringent age-appropriate selection guidelines. That's proof your policy works. There's also a comprehensive library inventory system that's been developed and implemented and that administration has conducted several trainings on. Those trainings have been available for librarians, campus administrators, campus reconsideration committee members, which includes teachers and parents. As recently as this week on June 17th, the board, as you know, went a step further and provided all parents with the opportunity to opt in their child to access young adult or higher fiction levels. Should a parent fail to opt their child in, their child will not have access to young adult or higher levels of fiction throughout the district. This action gives parents the opportunity to review the library materials online, which they can do, and make a determination that is right based on their knowledge of their individual students. You know, as well as anyone knows, that students of the same age, even in the same grade, are not at the same maturity level, regardless of those factors being the same. Today, there are 4 books included in this grievance, and each reconsideration committee reviews, and did in this case, whether the books constitute harmful material or obscenity as a threshold determination before the consideration of moving to the next step, the selection criteria. Only if the book is not deemed unlawful does the reconsideration committee then review the selection criteria, as was done in this case for each of the 4 books. Based on Ms. Giles' appeals, it is clear she has a fundamental misunderstanding as to the legal definitions of harmful material and obscenity under the Texas Penal Code. In fact, Ms. Giles fails to acknowledge that to meet the definition of harmful material, the novels must be of no utterly redeeming social value, which is a very high standard, and must be reviewed and has to be reviewed as a whole. As you know, you've probably been quoted a time or two of something out of context. When it's out of context, it's misleading and it's inaccurate. The book subject to this grievance, when taken as a whole,
are not without any social value. We heard quite a bit from your speakers today of specific personal value to many of them. The books are written by female authors sharing coming-of-age stories and life experiences of the main characters. Ms. Giles selected passages to support her understanding that the books constituted harmful material is out of context. It's also an affirmative defense that harmful material may be displayed if it is for an educational purpose. Again, none of these books have been deemed harmful material. Similarly, Ms. Giles fails to show that the challenge books contain obscenity when reviewed as a whole. In fact, there appears to be a pattern of misunderstanding of the district's utilization of the expedited interim review, which was adopted to allow the district to review materials, in part, if they were lengthier text, and remove them from the shelves temporarily if it was alleged that those materials constituted harmful material or obscenity. But that determination was based solely on the information asserted by the complainant, whether true or not. The books were not reviewed as a whole until the reconsideration committee met. Ms. Giles thought the district was making an admission about the content when in fact it was a regurgitation of the policy language that did not tell the whole story, which only occurs after the entire book is reviewed. This confusion was addressed in the Level 2 appeal response you have in front of you. I want to alert the board to an important consideration, and that is, ultimately, the review committee makes sure no portion of work is taken out of context. They do this by reading and analyzing the entire book as a whole, which is the only way it could be fairly viewed and considered as meeting the district's requirements, as well as legal ones. As the process shows, these books are lawfully allowed to remain in the district's libraries. That said, any parent, including Ms. Giles, can be the ultimate decision maker of what their child reads from the district's libraries and hopefully otherwise. Looking at district policy, EFB local, it outlines a very rigorous process for both selecting and evaluating library materials. Library materials are materials for voluntary inquiry, not a direct or required method of instruction. There is no legal or pragmatic requirement for a student to check out library books. For each novel here, the district completed the expedited interim review based solely on the allegations and content presented by Ms. Giles. Then the reconsideration committee, made up of 2 parents, a librarian, 2 teachers, and a campus administrator, read the library material in its entirety. The committee reviewed the text to determine if they were unlawful, and if not, to then apply the selection criteria. 3 committees with different stakeholders reviewed the books and made a determination based on the information reviewed. The standard is substantial evidence. The committee reviewed the text, professional reviews, the age groups, and other selection criteria and found the books to be in compliance with district policy EFB local. The substantial weight of the evidence supports the committee's determination and outcomes. To be clear, the administration is not endorsing any ideas expressed in the books at issue, and it's not asking you to endorse the ideas either. Rather, the administration is here to allow the board to make the determination whether the administration followed district policy and state law, and whether the determination at the reconsideration committee was based on the substantial weight of the evidence. The district administration, in partnership with the board, continues to provide deference to parents to choose what is right for their individual student without allowing the administration or another parent to make that choice on their behalf. Thank you.
That was 8 minutes and 20 seconds.
8 minutes and 20 seconds left.
That's how much was used. So of the 15 minutes, you're making me do quick math. 7 minutes.
Of the 20 minutes.
So she has 12 minutes for rebuttal.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Ms. Davis, at this time you have reserved 9 minutes for rebuttal. You may make your rebuttal presentation on behalf of the complainant. The board secretary will indicate to you when you have approximately 1 minute left. You may begin now.
Thank you. You know, the one thing that always strikes me when I help parents with grievances and other issues is the notion that gets spread that they are somehow anti-public education, or they hate teachers or administrators, and they're the reason teachers and administrators are leaving the profession. And it really just could not be further from the truth. And it is really been shocking to me to see the level of bullying that happens to parents who do speak up. You get members of the community who come up here and personally attack them in public comment, and they don't even know this woman. They don't know her heart. They don't know why she's doing this. They don't know her at all. And she gets accused of, trying to force her beliefs on other people and hating the school district. In reality, it is the exact opposite. It is about protecting all children from harmful material, which is exactly what HB 900 was designed to do. It has nothing to do with ideology. It has nothing to do with imposing your morals on somebody else. It is about protecting children, minors, from sexually explicit, pervasively vulgar, and obscene content. Some of these books that we are talking about today are available to children as young as 12. And you've got books in the library that, use the word ass 109 times, bitch 7 times, cock twice, fuck 16, piss 21, shit 151, the N-word 4 times. I mean, come on. Please explain to me how you can read a book like that as a whole and think it's somehow educationally appropriate for a 12-year-old. What in the world are we doing here? Somebody in public comment said that earlier, and I wholeheartedly agree. What in the world are we all doing here? I want to remind y'all, I forgot to mention this earlier, that, obviously the request for relief we're asking for is for these 4 books to be removed from the libraries online as well, and any classroom libraries, permanent removal. And then also for the policy to be changed that once the administrator and librarian determine that a book has met the definition of harmful material, pervasively vulgar, or obscene, that's it. There's no need to go through the reconsideration process at that point. They keep talking to you about as a whole, as a whole, as a whole. That is not what the law requires. And again, I would submit to you, please explain to me how non-vulgar words or good lessons can make a pervasively vulgar book or a sexually explicit book somehow not pervasively vulgar. That doesn't make sense. The policy that you all have, EFB local, and the standards that are in there, it does not include all the standards that are applicable under HB 900. And I can point you to it specifically here in just a second. That's okay. While she's looking for that, I will also just point out to y'all that your student code of conduct, there are multiple provisions in this student code of conduct where students can be disciplined for speaking some of the words that are in these books, for sending content that's in some of these books. They can be disciplined for it. Why in the world are they allowed to go in your library and read it if you're going to subject them to discipline for it? On the policy point, where's the other one? Where's the policy? I know you had that. Which one? This. No. This. Code of ethics. No. Okay. Under the new EFB local that was adopted Monday, under the expedited interim review, that particular policy does not include all of the standards under the TSLAC collection policies. For example, TSLAC
Ms.
notes.
Davis, was this raised somewhere in the lower levels?
Yes.
Can you point in the record where it was raised?
Well, I just got the record during the meeting, so I haven't actually read through it, honestly, and it also doesn't include all the recordings. So no, I can't point you specifically to where. But since this isn't an official legal proceeding, I would like to be allowed to discuss it. Unless we want to just continue to hide the ball and jerk people around. The EFB local policy.
Board, I would just advise that anything that's not contained in the local record that you disregard, as this is based on the record of the lower level proceedings. Thank you.
And under your local policies, you basically have the authority to do whatever the heck you want. I would point you to the request for reconsideration of instructional resources for Poet X. This is part of your local record. And this is on the level 1 complaint form, page 2. Ms. Giles pointed out that EFB local board policy does not include all the selection criteria and guidelines as defined by HB 900, passed in 2023, or the TSLAC guidelines. The TSLAC guidelines include that schools cannot have, per HB 900, library material rated sexually explicit, or library material that is pervasively vulgar or educationally unsuitable. Those standards are not included under your EFB local expedited interim review policy. I want to mention two other things in closing. You know, as I just mentioned, you all are well aware that school districts have a significant amount of autonomy in Texas. And that works great as long as you're doing your job. And it also works great when there's enforcement when you're not doing your job. And the way things are in Texas, it's real hard to hold school districts accountable when they're not doing their job. And when superintendents don't report things that they're supposed to report. In this particular instance, because you are violating the education code under HB 900, we can appeal this to the TEA, and we do intend to. The commissioner has jurisdiction over this, and we do intend to, take it that route if we need to, which hopefully we don't, because again, y'all have already spent enough taxpayer money and time and administrator time and resources that could be better directed elsewhere when all you need to do is just comply with the law and stop forcing parents to do your job for you. In conclusion, I want to reiterate a comment that was made in public comment about Representative Patterson and some comments that he has made about this board and the leadership of this district, because I wholeheartedly agree that what y'all are doing is weak leadership, and you're hiding behind well-paid lawyers that are being paid with the tax dollars of this community. And then because you all claim to be conservatives, you congratulate yourselves for adopting an opt-in policy and giving parents the power. My goodness, thank you so much for keeping sexually explicit materials in your libraries and giving parents the power to say, I don't want my kid to read that book. You're not complying with the law, period.
You have
And
1 minute.
courageous leaders would do better.
All right, thank you. At this time, you've reserved approximately 12 minutes for your rebuttal. Ms. Anderson, you may take your, you may make your presentation on behalf of the board, on behalf of the administration. The board secretary will let you know when you have approximately 1 minute left. You may proceed.
Thank you. Ms. Davis says that you are forcing parents to do a job for you and shifting the burden to parents. Instead, you are giving parents the freedom to make decisions in the best interests of their own children, and they are best poised to do so. Notably, all 4 books at consideration today are in the high school collection, not in the lower schools, not in the middle schools, not in elementary schools, only high schools. So the ages of those children, as you know, is not typically 12 years old. It's significantly higher, and that's an important distinction. The law that's been cited over and over is enjoined, meaning it is currently unenforceable, meaning you are not required and in fact should not be following it. The complainant is asking for a result that does impose her personal individual will on those of all parents and assuming her beliefs are aligned with those of every individual parent in Lovejoy ISD. In your district, you recognize the diversity of the student population and family ideologies. And as such, we, administration, value an individual family's ability to determine for their children what is appropriate and aligned with their own family values. Ms. Giles' intention to remove any book that she views in her objective opinion is not only not required, and in fact, it's not really even allowed. You've got a process, a due process, a fair process with notice, with hearing, with appeal rights that goes through a rigorous review. That's happened in this case. by important stakeholders selected for the process and familiar with it, who have an objective view of coming in and looking at the context of a whole. The process must be and was followed and gave you a result that you can feel confident about and uphold. Notably, after the district made the process available via direct emails to parents, to date, only one parent has chosen to opt out of library materials since 2022. Ms. Giles is not one of them. The district is also working to increase awareness of the opt-in process by posting this process online and will be adding it to the student handbook for the 24-25 school year. District administration appreciates your time and attention to this matter and asks that you uphold the review committee's decisions to allow the books to remain. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Members of the board, are there
Mr.
any questions we need to address?
Mr. Owens, can I just make one statement? The law is still in effect. It may be partially enjoined, but it is
The
still in
time
effect.
for questions is now. There's no more presentation.
Questions, Barrett, if I can go ahead.
Mr. Wheelis, go ahead, please.
Ms. Davis, I have a question for you. What is my role as a board member during the grievance process? Do I need to determine if a book is appropriate to go in the library or not?
I think you need to make sure the district is following the law. And in this particular instance, they're not.
Rebecca, I'm going to ask you the same question. What's my role as a board member during the grievance process? Do I need to determine if a book should be in the library?
Sure. So as Mr. Owens shared in the script that he read earlier, the process is twofold. One, to make sure that EFB legal and local, as Ms. Davis pointed out, are being implemented with fidelity. And then two, also making sure that the substantial weight of the evidence supported the reconsideration committee's determination. It's not to substitute your own judgment or your personal beliefs.
Dr. Tinsley, approximately how many hours have gone into the reconsideration process for these 4 books?
There are 6 committee members on each reconsideration committee, and it averages per book about 9 to 10 hours, so about 40 to 50 hours to read the books, keeping in mind that that's outside of the workday for our staff, and it's volunteered by our parents who are reading those books. In addition, that does not include the time that the committee has to come together to review and determine the determination whether the books remain in the collection or not.
Dr. Tinsley, these next questions are for you. So how many parents have opted their students out of these 4 books?
We have had none.
How many parents have opted their students out of any book in the library?
We've had one parent over the course of 2 years since we adopted this, and it was at an elementary campus that the parent opted to have one book that they did not want them to have access to.
Have there been any books removed through the reconsideration process and a weeding out process?
There has, through the weeding process or removal process, there's been a significant number of books that have been removed for various reasons. And there has been one book removed through the reconsideration process.
How many books do you consider significant?
Since 2022, I would say well over 1,000 books.
What is the total circulation of these 4 books of the last 2 years?
I don't have for the last 2 years, or these books, I don't have that in front of me right now. I believe you have that you may have that in your packet. Are you talking about total circulation just overall for the 4 titles or just overall for the?
Total amount of times being checked out.
I don't have that information in front of me. I believe it is in your books, your handouts there.
And then what age groups fall under the young adult fiction?
Young adult fiction is classified for ages 12 to 18.
There was a question raised about the legitimacy of our reconsideration committee's process. Can you speak to that, please?
Are you referring to the?
I think they said it was a sham process and it didn't happen, or I don't know what the words were, but they insinuated that it possibly was not done in accordance
Correct.
to how it's been presented.
Okay.
Can you address that?
Absolutely. So we follow board policy as far as the makeup of the reconsideration committee.
At the time, we've had 4 different committees at the high school operating to review the 16 books that have been that we have moved forward for reconsideration. Those committees are made up of a campus administrator, a school librarian, 2 parents, and 2 teachers. We train them in the process. They utilize the board policy to determine and follow the process as far as whether the books meet the criteria to remain in the collection or not remain in the collection. The committee is expected to read the book, and every member is expected to read the books in their entirety prior to convening to determine the determination whether or not it would remain in the collection or not.
Mr. Owens, we've submitted PIRs to try to get that
Again,
information.
there's no question on that.
There's no question to us.
I understand that, but you're not getting the full story. And I'm sorry, I'm not gonna sit here and be silent and let you hear half-truths. We've
You're
asked
gonna
for that
actually,
information.
you're gonna work within our rules, or you won't be here. So you can
I
either
am-
choose to be, or I'll remove you.
I'm trying to be respectful.
So you need to stop talking until we ask you a question.
This is not due process.
I have a follow-up question to that. So as part of the reconsideration committee's process, was part of their process to evaluate the title as obscene or harmful?
It is within the criteria, the selection criteria, and whether
it's
it meets that as a whole, yes.
It's not in the criteria.
For Ms. Tinsley, did you follow EFB local policy?
Yes, I did.
For Ms. Giles, did you follow EFB local policy?
Yes, I did.
For the lawyer, sorry.
We did, we
Okay.
did.
Is, Rebecca, is the EFB local policy a legal policy?
It incorporates the legal standards. So you have EFB legal, which then EFB local is created in conjunction to meet those requirements that are set forth in EFB legal. So yes.
I know.
Ms.
Thank you.
Davis, can you raise your question to me now so that we can,
Well, it's not.
can you make your statement,
My
brother?
statement is, we have submitted, Ms. Giles has submitted public information requests to try and figure out who is on these reconsideration committees. Are they following the selection criteria that's in here? Are they following some other criteria? Is the makeup of the committee consistent with the policy? She has been told twice, no such responsive records exist. And now, all of a sudden, there's all sorts of information from the district about how these committees are working. Either the information exists, and they lied and didn't give it to us, or they're doing all of this by phone or in person and not in any writing whatsoever, which I find incredibly not credible, or the committees don't exist. It has to be one of those. We've tried multiple times to get that information. It's all smoke and mirrors to try to hide what's really going on. And I gotta tell you, it's what they're trying to do, because you asked about the weeding process. A lot of the books that she's submitted for reconsideration have been removed through the weeding process. And they're doing that, I would submit, because they don't want to get yelled at by these people in the gallery here who speak in public comment and tell you they want all these books in the schools and they want parents to have the ability to choose. So they're doing it in a way to avoid that sort of criticism, which is not good leadership.
Mr. Owens, did you get your question answered?
I got my question answered.
Again, it's not due process, y'all. And it's all smoke and mirrors, and it's all a dog and pony show, so you guys can do whatever you want.
Are there
anyways.
other questions from the board?
Yes. Ms. Davis, when were you retained to appear in this matter?
It's attorney-client privilege information. I'm not-
When you were retained is not.
Well, I believe that it is, and it's not relevant to our grievance.
Okay.
As a
Who retained you?
I'm Ms. Giles' attorney.
Is she paying your legal fees, or is
It's not
another
relevant
entity?
to our grievance.
Okay.
Are you paying the district's legal fees?
Ma'am, you're not allowed to ask me questions, and
Well,
if you refuse to answer my question, that's fine, I'll move on. This is an administrative hearing. I'm not a judge. You're not under oath. If you don't want to answer the question, I'll move on.
I'm not lying, if that's what you're trying to imply. Your question is irrelevant to the grievance, and I find it incredibly offensive, quite honestly.
Ms. Tinsley, in the last 2 years, how many grievances has Ms. Giles filed apart from the book challenges?
7 grievances have been filed during the 23-24 school year, and 1 grievance was filed in 22-23 school year.
And how many PIRs in the last 2 years has Ms. Giles filed?
There have been 23.
Ms. Davis, you agree that we're here today to discuss voluntary library materials as opposed to required instructional materials?
We're here to discuss materials that violate the standards under HB 900, instructional materials.
So you don't agree that we're talking about voluntary library materials and that there's a distinction between that and required instructional materials?
There is a distinction between assigned text by a teacher, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
And as
It
you
doesn't
sit
matter,
here
though.
today, you're aware that Ms. Skiles' student has never checked out any of these 4 books.
That has nothing to do with the law, sir, and as an attorney, you should know that.
Are you aware or not whether Ms. Skiles' student has checked out or read any of these 4 books?
I don't know, and I don't care because it's irrelevant under the law, and you should know that. Kids can also read books without checking them out, and you guys just spent a bunch of money buying library furniture so they can sit in the library and be comfortable reading books in there without checking them out.
Are you aware that Ms. Skiles has not opted out of any titles at issue here today, any of the 4 titles?
I've heard them talk about that. It's irrelevant
Are
under
you
the
aware
law.
of it is my question.
I've heard them talk about it.
And that's
So-
your only source of information?
It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant, and you're missing the point.
We can ask the questions we like to ask, and you can answer them or not.
And I'd be
And
happy
you can
to-
decide if they're relevant. This is not a court of law. Understand?
I understand that. Mr. Wood apparently wants to take my deposition, so, I mean, I'm entitled to answer the questions how I want to answer them. And I'm sorry that you all think this is funny, but you guys have books in your libraries
We're trying to
that
stick to the
violate
law. We're not interested in your
No, you're not trying to
antics.
stick to the law.
Ma'am,
You
we're
asked me-
asking questions.
You're not trying to stick to the law. You asked me how much money she's paying me. It's irrelevant. If I was doing this for free, would it matter? You have books in your library that violate the law. That is what
You're not
matters.
answering a question, you're
I
speaking.
did answer your question.
No, right now, you're just giving statements.
And?
There's not a question pending.
And?
There's not a question pending.
Ask a question.
All right, I will. So you've talked about it today. I'm assuming you're familiar with our EFB local policy.
Yes.
All right. And are you aware that in the guiding principles of that policy, there is a statement that says a parent or guardian's ability to exercise control over instruction and instructional resources, including library materials, extends only to his or her own child, as set forth in Education Code, Chapter 26. Are you aware that's in the policy, and do you agree with that?
It makes perfect sense. It's also irrelevant to the law.
We'll discuss the law in just a second.
Happy to.
Okay, I think there was a lot of discussion from you in your statements about sexually explicit and HB 900. The definition of sexually explicit as contained in HB 900 has been found unconstitutionally vague by federal court, correct?
There are multiple definitions of material in HB 900 that should not be in your libraries. I'm not intimately familiar with all the court cases that are currently pending about this law.
Well, you said earlier you agreed that it was enjoined, at least in part.
Part of it has been.
Yeah. And the definition of sexually explicit has been found unconstitutionally vague by a federal court and enjoined.
Multiple parts of HB 900 are still in effect.
I'm just asking you about the
And what I
sexually
find-
explicit definition.
What I find concerning is that you are going out of your way to try and justify keeping these books in your library. That is disturbing to me.
I'm discussing the law with you, and all I'm asking you is the definition of sexually explicit has been found unconstitutionally vague.
I don't know one way or the other. I know HB 900 is still at least in effect in part, and your school district is not in compliance with it.
Is it your opinion that HB 900 required school districts to rate texts as sexually explicit or sexually relevant?
It puts that burden on book vendors.
And that part of the law was definitely enjoined. We can agree on that.
Correct.
So as we sit here today, are you aware of any vendor or any legal entity that has rated any of the 4 books that we're here to discuss today as sexually explicit or sexually relevant?
I'm not, and it's irrelevant to the point. They don't, you are completely obscuring the point, and you know it, because you're a seasoned litigator. So you're using your expertise to your advantage, and
I'm having a discussion with you about the applicable law, and I believe you're misrepresenting it.
you are too.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
I'm just saying, the definition of sexually explicit has been declared unconstitutionally vague. Yes or no?
You know full well that portions of HB 900 are still in effect. And you know that school districts are not supposed to have pervasively vulgar or obscene content in their schools. And you also know that under PICO, this board has the authority to remove pervasively vulgar material regardless of HB 900. You want to sit there and take my deposition, go for it.
I'm not taking your deposition.
You absolutely
No,
are.
I'm not. Listen,
I would like an opportunity to hear your answer to the same questions, please.
Yes.
Because what I
it's
want to
probably a better
understand,
use of our time.
what I want to understand is the
A better
applicable.
use of our time would be removing the books through the
Ms.
expedited
Davis,
process.
please refrain
Ms.
from
Davis,
commenting.
we'd love to have you stay here, and I really would appreciate it. But I'd like to understand the specifics of the applicable law that are enforced today, and whether it's been enjoined or not is relevant, whether you want to call it out or not.
I've
So,
already told
Ms.
you part of it
Anderson,
has been, sir.
Part of the arguments that have been espoused here today is that HB 900 requires review of a selection in part to determine whether it's sexually explicit. Have you heard those arguments made here today?
Yes.
Right. And do you agree that the definition of sexually explicit has been found unconstitutionally vague by the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas in Austin Division?
Yes.
And that injunction was upheld, at least in part, by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals.
True.
And the bill required vendors, not school districts, not individuals, to apply either a sexually relevant or a sexually explicit rating to those books.
Yes.
And that part of the law was enjoined.
Correct.
And so that's never happened.
Right.
And there's no duty in HB 900 to rate a selection by anyone else,
There is
either
not.
sexually relevant or sexually explicit.
Correct.
And I think the point Ms. Davis keeps trying to make is that HB 900 also discusses the penal code definition of pornography,
Yeah.
right? But it also says that in order to make that determination, a text should be considered in its whole, not in part.
It has to be.
And the penal code also states that it is an affirmative defense if the material is made available in a scientific or educational setting, correct?
Correct.
I have a question, Jeff, while you're looking at that. Follow up. Under the current law, if we were to do anything and not evaluate these texts in whole, would we be violating the law?
In my opinion, you would be, and you'd be doing a great disservice to your community.
Can I answer that question, please?
I got my answer, thank you.
Ms. McLaughlin, can I answer that question
I'll
for
ask
you,
that
please?
question. In your view, would the board be, if they made a decision based on part of the text versus the whole, do you believe that we would be violating the law?
No, and the reason for that is there are multiple definitions under HB 900 for materials that should not be in your library. Sexually explicit is one, harmful material as defined under the penal code is another, and pervasively vulgar or educationally unsuitable is a third. So there are multiple ways that books can be improper in your libraries.
Can I amend my answer, or really supplement it, to mention that the First Amendment requires that you look at the whole context? Once a book is in the library, you cannot remove it without both due process and comporting with the First Amendment. That First Amendment right belongs to your students. You cannot take it away without going through a process, and that process requires the entire content to be considered.
That is not true under the PICO standard under the United States
Ms.
Supreme
Davis, will
Court.
you get closer to your microphone to make sure that it picks up?
That is not entirely accurate. Under PICO, which everybody likes to cite, the United States Supreme Court decision about books, You can remove things that are pervasively vulgar or educationally unsuitable. What you can't do is say, this is a book about a lesbian couple and I don't like lesbians, so I'm gonna remove that. We all agree you can't do that, and we're not asking you to do that, but you can remove books that are pervasively vulgar or educationally unsuitable. And again, please explain to me how a book that this gentleman who's not here anymore had, got warned, and presumably had he used the F word twice, he would have been escorted out of here. Please tell me how a book that has that word in it 16 times that we can't even say once in this meeting full of adults is somehow educationally suitable when you read the whole thing. Seriously? That's the argument they're making to you?
Ms. Davis, can I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
So your argument that we should be considering not the whole, can you point to something specifically in case law or precedent or something to say that
Yeah, the TSLAC standards makes no mention of having to review the work as a whole. I had it right here.
if you have documentation showing us where we should not be considering the whole of the work, I would like to
Well,
see
and
that.
one, I would point you to PICO, but two, I would also point you to the TSLAC standards that have come out under, Title 13 of the Texas Administration Code. There's no mention of reviewing the work as a whole.
That wasn't my question. I wanted to see something saying we should only be considering in part and not be considering the whole of the work, because everything I've read, especially, and I'm going to lean on First Amendment. I think First Amendment is going to weigh heavier to me than an enjoined current kind of in limbo law. That seems to me to have more weight in my decision-making. So if I need to be considering something that's not the whole of the work, that's something that I want to see more clearly.
Okay, there is no First Amendment right to have obscene content in your libraries, and that is specifically in the TSLAC standards under the administrative code. So I would point you to that. I would point you to PICO, which gets cited a lot, that you do not have to look at everything as a whole.
You're saying these things, but
I actually have a copy of
Mhm. I can't hear you very well. Ms.
Apologies.
No,
The subsection that is requiring school districts to have a reconsideration process. And I'm on item 4, and it says, include a reasonable time frame approved by the school board for the review and final decision by a committee charged with the review of the item in its entirety.
Sorry, I'm trying to find where you're looking at. Is it this one?
And so, Title 13, Part 1, Chapter 4.
Yeah, she is, but I think it's a different section. Hold on. Title 13. Chapter 4.
I mean, that makes it pretty clear. That's we're only supposed to be looking at these things in their entirety. That's in the law.
Well,
So
and a follow-up question is because we've been referencing the definition of harmful material. How I read that is that harmful material means material whose dominant theme, as taken as a whole, meets the process to appeal to the prurient interest of a minor, is patently offensive to prevailing standards, and is utterly without redeeming social value.
And I'm trying to look at exactly the standard you're looking at, because it's not on this one that I printed out. So it's Title 13, Chapter 4 is what you're looking at?
Yes, Texas Administrative Code, Title 13, Part 1, Chapter 4, Subchapter A,
Okay.
Rule 4.2 for school library programs, collection
Okay.
development standards.
And you said subsection 4 of that?
Let's see, it's kind of a weird alphanumeric thing, so it'd be lowercase, we're in lowercase e for the reconsideration process.
Okay.
Item 3 and 4. And item 4 is, the way I see that written is that it is requiring review in its entirety. Could you comment?
Okay, I see where you're at. So I think the distinction that I would make is, can you look at it in its entirety? Yes. But under HB 900, the portions that are still in effect don't require that. So can you? Yes. Do you have to? No. You can look at it and see, does it meet one of these definitions that's still in effect under HB 900? And if it does, in whole or in part, you're prohibited from having it.
So for my own clarification on HB 900, and I am not a licensed attorney, is that I understand that again, layperson summary here is that there are effectively two pieces. There is the requirement for the book vendor to rate that material and for school districts to follow the process according to that. And then there was a directive to the Texas Library Commission to develop library collection standards that were to be adopted by the State Board of Education. So what I'm understanding is the library portion that went through the State Board is still in effect, but the book ratings by the vendors is what's enjoined, including the definition of sexually explicit and sexually relevant, that all of that piece has been deemed not in effect. Can you please comment?
But sexually explicit is only one of the definitions of materials that you can't have in your libraries, is the distinction I'm trying to make.
Okay, could you go over that one more time as to where that, so if the definition of sexually explicit is enjoined, what are those other definitions that we should look at? You mentioned one was harmful material.
Yeah, so it's under subsection D of HB 900. So the acquisition of harmful material as defined by the penal code. The second one is sexually explicit material. And the third one is permits the exclusion from a school library of materials that are pervasively vulgar or educationally unsuitable.
Okay, Ms. Brad.
And it also includes, it also includes another subsection under that that mentions, to your First Amendment point, that obscene content is not protected by the First Amendment.
So I'm aware of that portion. Ms. Bradley, could we have the legal definition for harmful?
Let me just ask a question of administration. The other two definitions besides sexually explicit, which are operable, if that's a word, in HB 900, she said that was harmful material as defined by the penal code. The penal code requires evaluation of the material as a whole, does it not?
Correct.
All right. The other standard she mentioned was pervasively vulgar and educationally unsuitable and obscenity, which is essentially the standard set forth by PICO versus Board of Education. Correct?
That's correct.
And in coming up with that standard, did the PICO court, the Supreme Court, require evaluation of these selections as a whole?
I'm going to guess the answer is yes. I didn't reread it today, but importantly, the Texas Penal Code expressly defines obscenity to require the work taken as a whole.
Correct.
Lacks serious literary, artistic, political, and scientific value. So right in the penal code that's cited.
I'm hearing two different viewpoints on the definitions being referenced today. Ms. Bradley, could we please have guidance in that regard?
Yes, so Texas Penal Code, Section 43.24 defines harmful material as harmful material means material whose dominant theme, taken as a whole, appeals to the prurient interest of a minor in sex, nudity, or excretion, is patently offensive to prevailing standards in the adult community as a whole with respect to what is suitable for minors, and is utterly without redeeming social value for minors. And then, as Mr. Wood indicated earlier, there is an affirmative defense to prosecution under the section of penal code related to the scientific, educational, or other similar justification.
Rebecca, sorry if I may intervene here. Tell me what it means by affirmative defense. What does that mean?
So what that means is this is a criminal statute. If there is criminal prosecution, then there would be a defense because of the purpose for which the material was used.
Thank you.
I'd like to go back for a second to the committee and the process. I think we could argue for a long time about the legal, whether we should be looking at this in part or in whole, but I think we've heard opinions that we can judge on that. If we are to evaluate these works in whole, can you explain the literary merit that the committee found on the books in question?
Would you like that by each title? So let me start with the Freedom Riders. First of all 4 of these books, I think we noted that, are by female authors. 3 of the 4 are women of color, and they all 4 share minority experiences about coming of age. The Freedom Riders is a true story about a young teacher who worked in a high school made up of predominantly at-risk students experiencing significant challenges, personal challenges in their lives. She led the students through a process of writing through their personal experiences and understanding that education can be a pathway to overcoming these challenges and change their trajectory in life. The book does touch on racism, the importance of being non-judgmental and having compassion for others, and understanding the importance of self-control. So the Unravel Me, it's a fictional story about a young girl with a special power who's faced with conflict and has to learn how to channel those powers to respond to oppression that she encounters. The book does lift up themes such as resilience, courage, and the importance of connection with others. The Poet X is about it's a fiction story about a young Dominican teenage girl from Harlem who's dealing with oppressive expectations from her mother, an absent father, teenage relationship, sexual harassment, and discrimination. And the main character, finds her voice through writing, poetry, and speaking in a way to navigate her feelings and manages the challenges that she encounters. And then Concrete Rose, it's about a young African-American teenage male who has grown up in a home with a mother who's having to work 2 jobs, a father who's in prison. And the story focuses on how he becomes a teenage father and how he has to navigate the gangs and drug dealing, and how he does overcome that because of his desire to create a better life for his own son. Stereotyping, discrimination, poverty, and turning one's life around despite making bad decisions emerge as the theme of the book.
Have you read all of these books in their entirety?
Yes, I have.
And can you speak to going back through our EFB process and how we had revised it and allowing for the expedited review? Talk about how that process laid out with your logistics and I guess answer again if you feel like our process was followed and why there was some confusion about pulling those books and then going through the process and then the ultimate determination.
So the expedited interim review, which was put in place when the board initially adopted EFB local, the intent of that was to determine what was presented when an individual presents a reconsideration request for a book. We take only the information that's submitted in that form by the person who submitted it. So the librarian and myself we can only have that content. Most of these books we had not read in their entirety. So we have to take that and see if it does meet the penal code for meeting the terminology or the definition of obscenity. So at that time, we do remove the book while it's going through the reconsideration process with the committee, and it's off the shelves where students cannot access. So it's not determined as the book, it's as entirety, just what is submitted in the form. It may be, a couple of paragraphs. It may it's usually excerpts from the book, but it's not in its entirety. So your question whether or not if the process was followed, absolutely, I do believe the process was followed.
Dr. Tinsley, could you see that there would be opportunity for confusion amongst the parent community on how the definition would apply during the interim expedited review versus the reconsideration review, and could you speak about that?
Yes, and again, I'm going to go back to, we only have the information that's been submitted at the time, so that's what we have to base our decision on, whether it meets the definition of obscene and vulgar content.
Dr. Tinsley, can you explain why it took so long to get to this point? It seems like 9 months is a significant amount of time for something like this.
Absolutely. So there were 40 requests submitted in the fall for reconsideration, 40 titles submitted, and then another one was submitted in March, so 41 total. 16 of those titles were in the collection. So, as I mentioned earlier, we expedited as quickly as we could. We put in place 4 different committees at the high school, which were made up of a principal, a librarian, 2 parents, and 2 teachers, and each committee was different. It was not the same people serving on them. As I mentioned, it usually takes about 6 weeks to complete the process because we're having to read it outside of the school day. Again, we are not paying our teachers to do this. Parents are not paid to do it. They're doing it outside of their own time to complete the process, and then they reconvene for the committee to determine whether the book remains in the collection or not.
How are parents and teachers chosen to be on the committee?
The campus administrator, who is in charge of the committee, determines that. And usually teachers that are determined, they are teachers who come with a background of literature and understanding have some background with the books.
And in your opinion, would they have experience with this particular age group of children in determining if it's age appropriate?
Yes, they were all high school level teachers.
I have a couple of questions. I know it was asked of Dr. Tinsley if she had read the books, the 4 books being considered in entirety. Ms. Giles, is it Ms. Giles or Ms. Giles? I've heard it both ways.
Giles.
Have you read all 4 of these
That's
books
why,
in their
yes,
entirety?
that's why I submitted them.
Okay, and why did you choose these 4 for today for reconsideration?
Well, unfortunately, there's a time limit for the grievance process, and I let a few of them slip accidentally. So those didn't get to make it to this point. Some of the other books, as Dr. Tinsley has noted, has been removed through the weeding process, and so we're still waiting on the reconsideration committee to come back for the rest of the books. Just following the process.
If I could add on to her statement, Ms. Smith, as far as her reading the whole books and submitting the request for reconsideration after doing that, there was a comment made about these books involving female minority writers. And to me, making that point implies that there aren't female minority writers who write books that don't include this kind of content. As if we can't find in the millions of books out there, good female writers, minority writers, who write good books with good storylines and good morals and good lessons that don't use the word fuck 16 times.
Yeah, my question was just why these 4 books?
I understand. Do you want to elaborate any more on why these 4?
Just following the process.
And one more question. Is there a legal definition of educationally unsuitable? I've heard you say that several times. What is the legal definition of that?
I'm aware. I mean, I would point you probably to PICO. I don't think there's anything in state law or the TSLAC guidelines that necessarily defines it.
It's all educationally is referenced
Yeah.
in PICO.
It's referenced in that Supreme Court case that we keep mentioning, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
A question for Dr. Tinsley. Of the 4 books that we're discussing and deliberating about today, are you aware whether they are present in other high school libraries in our surrounding area?
Yes, they are.
Are they in multiple campuses in McKinney ISD?
Yes.
Are they in Highland Park
Yes.
ISD? Are they in multiple campuses in Wiley ISD?
Yes.
Are they in multiple campuses in Richardson ISD?
Yes.
And we're talking about all 4, correct?
Correct.
Are they available and present in libraries in multiple campuses in Plano ISD?
No.
I do not have that information right in front of me, but I believe they are in some of the campuses in Plano.
Are they present in multiple campus libraries in Frisco ISD?
Yes.
And are they present in the high school library at Melissa ISD?
Yes.
Okay, I attempted to take some of the notes regarding your presentation. I'd like to take the opportunity to answer some of those. So one of the things that you mentioned was that our EFB local policy does not comply with the Texas Library Standards adopted by the State Board of Education. Did I get that correct? Okay, Dr. Tinsley or Council, could you comment please on if our policy complies with the Texas Library Standards?
Completely.
Okay, one of the other things that was asked was what standard did the reconsideration committee use? I think there was a concern that they used a different standard. Ms. Davis or Ms. Giles, did I get that concern correct? It did. Dr. Tinsley, counsel, did the reconsideration, were they directed to use a different standard than what's in our policy and the library standard?
No, they were directed to follow EFB local.
And that wasn't exactly what I meant. So let me just, if I could clarify that. What I meant was they're using a different standard than that expedited initial review standard.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Tinsley and counsel, could you comment on if the I guess the administration did the interim and the reconsideration committee, are those two groups using a different standard?
No, there's not a different standard.
There isn't a different standard, but what the interim process does is pulls it based on out-of-context language, so that you take it off the shelves in case the rest of the book as a whole could do harm, right? That's the best interest of students. But when the review committee comes back, they look at the whole book in context, and that's why the outcomes could be different, and were in this case, and you would expect them to be. So the standard is not different, but the process is defined such that each level has a different set of steps, which were followed here.
Or a different scope of text that they review?
That's exactly right.
It could be in context, though. It could be out of context, but it could be in context.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Can I point you, Ms. McLaughlin, to page 6 of the EFB local that was just adopted on Monday has the expedited interim review. And to this whole point we've been going back and forth about in whole or in part, that it specifically references looking at the text as a whole or in part. So in other words, the district administrator could have made a decision at that level that as a whole, based on the material submitted, the material met the definitions under the penal code and harmful material and all the stuff that's listed here on page 6.
So I've had a similar question I've asked offline. I'll ask it here publicly. Dr. Tinsley, that portion of the interim expedited review does appear to say in whole or in part, but we've discussed here today that the penal code definition is in whole. So is our policy confusing for parents to understand how to apply? No. With respect to the interim expedited review. Thank you.
You know, it's really hard to say because what we look at, we have to just look at the decision whether the book remains on the shelf or not before it's reviewed is what we have. All I have is the information that's in part. I do not have the whole.
So question to Ms. Bradley, is part of the board's deliberation and action today, can that include a change to EFB local to clarify?
Absolutely. If the board finds that in any way EFB local is not working as the board intended, the board certainly could take action. I would advise that we do it at a later meeting simply because it's not posted for today. But you could ask or direct administration to bring that back for board consideration.
And one of our requests for relief was a change to this policy, I think probably different than what maybe you're thinking about. But I mean, I'll just tell you this, the expedited interim review policy, a lot of districts don't have that. This is a good thing. The problem comes in when y'all then submit it to this reconsideration dog and pony show committee, you know, this pending further review by the full reconsideration committee. That's the part that our request for relief was asking about.
So sorry for the nuance, I just want to make sure I understand. So we've talked about that we need to be following the direction by the Texas Library Standards and our policy needs to comply. Part of these standards require a district to develop a reconsideration committee process that is fair and thorough is the language that I see here, and that it reviews the work in the entirety. So I would like to better understand the concern of Lovejoy's reconsideration committee process, if that is indeed what's required of us.
Our concern is, number one, you have district level administrators and librarians making an initial determination that a material meets one of these definitions and should not be in your libraries, in whole or in part. They're making that decision. And then you're submitting it to a reconsideration committee that, I'll just tell you, this was in the board packet that y'all got. This is Guide for Reconsideration of Library Materials for Concrete Rows, and it lists 6 names here as being on the committee. We've never seen this document, ever, until today. This is what she was asking for and was told nothing exists. This is part of what I'm talking about when I mention roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. But in any event, You have qualified people at the administration level making a decision about a material based on their expertise, their education, their knowledge of the standards. And then you have this reconsideration committee of who knows who and who's picking it, and what bias they may have to keep or not keep a material. And they're overriding an administrator and a certified librarian in every instance that she's submitted.
Okay, so two follow-up questions. So the letter that I see in the packet that came from administration states that their review was temporary and would be reviewed by the reconsideration committee versus an override.
Well, what?
They permanently removed it during the meeting.
Yeah, I understand that, and I guess maybe, I mean, I just view that as a distinction without a difference. I mean, it's not necessarily, they are overriding it, though. I understand what you're saying. The distinction you're making is the removal is temporary. Okay, fair enough, I get that. But if they've already made a decision that that material should not be on the library shelf, why are we then giving 6 other people the decision or the power to change that?
Okay, one final question, I'm sorry.
And they
I'll
are,
turn-
and they are then still weeding the books outside the reconsideration process.
In theory, could be weeded on a different reason, though, right? Could be because of circulation or because of something like that, right?
They were weeded 3 days after she filed the request for reconsideration.
Okay.
So,
So final question for me is that the administration has answered that concern, and please state me if I'm wrong, that the interim expedited review was the in part portion and the reconsideration committee was the in its entirety portion. Do you agree or disagree that that's the distinction between those two reviews?
I understand that's the distinction that they're making, and what we're suggesting to you is that doesn't matter under the law, number one. And number two, please have them explain how a book that has determined to be, at least in part, pervasively vulgar, harmful, or what have you, then all of a sudden when you read the whole thing, it's not vulgar anymore? That makes no sense. It just doesn't.
So,
Go ahead, Barry.
Ms. Anderson, I want to understand our policy a bit better. I guess from my perspective, our intention with our policy is if we find language in a book that is concerning, that we can immediately remove that book from circulation, until which time and I've read the books painfully, until which time a committee can, or a person can read the entire book to determine whether it meets the threshold of the law. It gives us the ability to remove a book to the extent it might be harmful until we're able to review it and determine whether or not it is harmful and violates the law, or it's not harmful and doesn't. Is that, to me, that's the gist and the purpose of our policy. Do you agree that that's what it accomplishes?
Exactly. And it should do that. And that's a good stopgap to protect students while we allow time for the whole review, which is required by the First Amendment. I think the policy is actually fairly clear, and with the letter that came with the decision, understanding it is temporary, I don't believe there really was lots of confusion. You can't do it a different way unless you take out expedited review, which you can do and just leave it till the process is complete, but that's probably not best for students, and it's certainly not what's being requested of you.
But then if we did that, it would force us, without having in our policy, to leave a book that could be an issue
That's it.
on the shelf, until which time we can review it, which concerns me even more, given the number of books in these libraries and how many have been put in over decades.
That's right.
Becca, do you feel that our policy is confusing or violates any laws?
It does not violate the law. It may be confusing to parents. I can't speak on behalf of your parents and their understanding, so there may be ways in which the wording could be changed to be clarified. That's always part of your process as a board, once it's pointed out, but certainly I don't see any legal concerns as the board's attorney from the policy.
And your argument is that because of that interim review and that judgment made, that we shouldn't go back and read it in entirety and make a different decision. Is that what you're saying to us?
Yes, and I wouldn't, I mean, the option of removing the expedited review, I don't think is your only option here today. School boards have the authority under Supreme Court precedent to remove books that are pervasively vulgar or educationally unsuitable. And I understand there's all this worry that the ACLU is gonna come in and sue you or file a complaint or what have you, but school districts across the state are doing that. They're removing books that are pervasively vulgar or educationally unsuitable without making parents go through all these hoops and jump through all these, things and deadlines and timeframes and having committees and wasting taxpayer money. There are school districts across the state doing that.
And
have a
they can,
follow-up.
and those school districts, I think, can determine whether they comply by the law or not. I think we're gonna determine whether we comply by the law, and it's important to me that we do. I don't wanna subject us to, if this was clear, we wouldn't be having this hearing. It's obviously not clear. We wouldn't be wasting all this time. And you can talk about that all you want, but that's my statement about that. I would not, because someone else does it, doesn't mean I'm going to.
Well,
I want to ensure that our process gives us the flexibility to take action when we can within the law, and then take the time to review it to ensure that we uphold the law. And I think it accomplishes that, does it not?
Well, I hear what you're saying, Mr. Owens, but Mr. Wood spent a lot of time asking the district what other districts have these books. So if you're gonna look at other districts for that example, then you should look at them for.
Mr. Wood's entitled to his opinion, and I'm entitled to mine, and I'm
understand
talking
that.
about N of one, Barrett Owens speaking, about what my feelings are. Is that fair?
Not the team of 8, you're just talking about yourself individually?
asking questions, yes.
Okay, okay.
I have a
Certainly not
follow-up.
as a team of 8, sure.
I have a follow-up. So I would like better clarification. I think we talked about at the very beginning that our role here today primarily is to make sure that our policy has been followed. And we revised our policy a couple of years ago. We revised our policy again on Monday. And I want to make sure I understand specifically where you think we did not follow our policy, because that's the primary thing we're deciding today at this hearing, is that our policy has been followed. And Becca, can you correct me if I'm wrong on that, or is that accurate?
No, that's accurate, and then you're also determining whether, based on the local record, there's substantial evidence to support the reconsideration committee's determination.
So we want to make sure that our policy has been followed and that there's evidence that the reconsideration committee made a reasonable decision in their review process. Is that a good way to say that?
Yes.
Okay, so we've talked about the reconsideration process possibly being confusing, and we can look at revising that to try to add clarity. And you've said you like having that expedited review process, but you might do it differently. That I don't want to. We can talk about that in the future, but
That's not quite what I
Okay.
said or meant, if I could clarify. I mean,
Sure.
I think it's a great process to have. It's our opinion that once that initial determination has been made, sending it to a reconsideration committee for further review does not quite comply with the law, with HB 900, that the part of it that is still in effect. And part of
I
our-
understand your argument
Part
about
of our
that.
request is for a change in the policy so that it does comply.
Okay.
That was one of our requests for relief.
Okay, so beyond that, and the confusion around the expedited review and reviewing something in part versus in whole, are there other places where you feel like we've violated our current policy?
The short answer to your question is no. Our request for relief was for a change in the policy to comply with HB 900 that is in effect. And I'm not confused about how the expedited process works, neither is Ms. Giles. It's only confusing to the extent that you guys don't need to do it to comply with the law. And it's quite honestly, it's mind-blowing to me that we've been sitting here for 3 hours trying to convince this supposed conservative board to remove pervasively vulgar stuff from your libraries. That blows my mind.
I have a follow-up question. So did we follow the expedited review policy procedures, and did they follow the results when they published their report? And I'm talking about the committee on each 4 of the books.
So we follow policy as far as determining whether it met the expedited interim review, and that would have pulled it off the shelf while the committee process was being followed. And yes, the committee followed the reconsideration process as outlined in EFB local.
Becca, I'll just ask one more time. I think we got a little bit lost in all these discussions. Is EFB local a legal policy that we should follow?
It is legal in that it meets the legal requirements set forth by TSLAC.
Thank you.
So you had stated one of your requests was for consideration that we adjust our policies. Can you explain what you mean by that? Because I'm still a little bit unclear about that.
You want to speak to that? One of the requests was to adjust the policy to, once that initial determination has been made by the district administrator and librarian, that a material meets one of those definitions that's on page 6 of EFB local, that once that happens, the book is just removed.
Would you be, so I don't see a logistical feasible way to do that without forcing the review in its entirety before any determination would be made. The reason we changed that policy in 2022 is so that we would have the ability to err on the side of just to be cautious. If anything in isolation and in part was deemed at all concerning, we wanted to err on the side of taking it out and giving us time to do a thorough review. That was the spirit, I remember, of why we made that change. And what you're saying to me is go back to our old policy, which would have been when these 40 titles or 100 titles or however many it was, they would all remain on the shelves until the ability to review the work in total. And I don't see how that, it can't be both ways. So
That's not what I'm asking for. I'm not asking for it to stay on the shelf pending a reconsideration committee. And honestly,
So then what you're asking is to only review something out of context, and
No.
anytime you see anything that could be concerning out of context, you gotta pull it, I mean, and
I'm not
that seems
asking
like
you
what
to-
you're asking us to do.
I'm not asking you to review things out of context. Look, I could understand if we're talking about a situation where, you know, you've got a 400-page book and there's a sentence in there like that uses the F word or a curse word or whatever, and that's the only issue with it. Totally get it. That's out of context. These books that we're talking about aren't that.
Have you read these books in their entirety?
Ms. Giles has.
Have you?
I have not.
Okay.
No.
I have, and I'll tell you, I'll speak for myself. I'm not gonna speak for the board. When I first saw the request, some of the language was concerning to me. And then when I read the books in whole, I have a different perspective. And let me read.
I mean, if you're comfortable with a masturbation scene being in
I'm
your
not
library,
gonna
then that's your prerogative,
I'm
and
gonna
we'll just take
say-
it to the TEA
I'm-
and be
I'm
done
gonna
with
s-
it. I mean, I don't
Let
want to
me-
waste
Let me
everybody's
ask
time
a
today.
question. Let me ask a question. And I'm just gonna say, lots of things can be taken out of context. Do you agree with that?
Sure.
Okay. One of the things in our policy says that parents and guardians are the primary decision makers regarding their students' access to library materials. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay, I do too. And I've got 4 kids. And I'm not gonna say that I'm gonna think that all 4 of them should have access to the same things either. They're all different, right? I want to leave the decision for what's appropriate for my kids to my decision. And we've tried to make a policy that leaves power in the parents' hands. And I want to do what's best for each one of my kids and make the appropriate decision on what they're mature enough to understand and talk through it with them. And doing things that are going to take power out of our parents and our community is something that I'm going to have a very high bar for. And these things that are concerning, you say you agree that parents should be the primary decision makers. Why is Ms. Giles filing these things to take power out of our parents' hands?
It's 2 separate issues, sir. There is the issue of parents being the primary decision makers for their children, and the issue of complying with the law and having appropriate materials for children. If this board honestly wants to tell the community that having an explicit masturbation scene in a book that's available for 13 and 14-year-olds is appropriate, have at it. More power to you. Like, if that's really the position you want to take, go for it. But there's two separate issues. It's complying with the law and parental authority. And the problem that I have with your parental authority point is you probably don't even know what books are in your kids' libraries. There's no way you could possibly know all of the ones that are there and all of the things that they talk about. There's no way. So acting like you're giving parents this great authority to make decisions for their children when they don't have the full access to information to make that decision is just making a great statement and going, oh my God, we're awesome, we gave parents the power. Parents don't have a clue what's in your libraries because your district has made it harder for them to find out.
Are our materials readily available for all of our parents to access?
No.
Yes,
Of
yes,
course
they're
she's
on,
gonna
we have
say
them
yes.
online.
Mhm.
They can
And
access
classroom
through our catalog.
libraries exist.
Is this library catalog searchable?
Yes,
Can you search on specific words?
Yeah.
yes, you can search on specific titles and genre.
Would the parent be taking away the child's First Amendment rights if he does a search, he or she does a search by specific word and then chooses to use the opt-out from our policy to remove that child's access to that book from our library?
No, that's what parents are supposed to do, parent.
Can you speak?
If we took that book out of the library, would we be violating that student's First Amendment right?
You do if you don't go through this process that's laid out by law.
So if we do not follow the policy, and earlier all parties said that they did follow the policy, then that would be violating that student's First Amendment right.
Right.
Becca and Ms. Anderson, could you speak one more time to the legality, and Marvin, you've asked this question a couple of times too, but I just want to be extremely clear in my mind that we are not doing anything with our current policy that could be considered in violation of any law, First Amendment, HB 900, as they stand today. Is there anything that, I'd like both of your opinions on that.
In my opinion, your policy comports with law.
And I would agree. I also have heard the terms pervasively vulgar and educationally suitable. And to Ms. Davis's point earlier, there's not a specific definition. It's within that context as it's used in that Supreme Court decision. And so pervasively vulgar, for example, doesn't have a specific legal definition in the penal code like harmful material or obscenity does.
If it does not have a definition, can we actually add that to a policy and still be legal?
You certainly could consider it. The difficulty becomes making sure that it's viewpoint neutral and non-discriminatory.
That's exactly right. And what's so interesting about the promulgation of policy is the legal provision is that which follows recent statutes and case law. And then the local provision is what you can choose to do with your own district that is lawful. So you have more discretion. So your EFB is going to look a little different than Richardson, Plano, Frisco. Or it can, right? But it still has to comport with the legal requirements. And that's what we're talking about is that First Amendment right, and that's the whole context, which is so important.
So there's actually several levels of laws, rules, constitutions, and all kinds of things that we have to pay attention to. That is in a legal side of our policy statement, not just the EFB local side.
Exactly.
EFB local still has to be legal within the legal contract, the legal area of our policies.
That's it.
I can't see your last name on the end, I'm sorry, but just, you've mentioned.
Marvin Bobo.
Mr. Bobo, you've mentioned the First Amendment point a couple of times, and obscene content is not protected by the First Amendment. If I walked up to one of your children on the street and handed them some of these books that are in your libraries, I could be arrested. To act like it makes a difference that, and I understand she's gonna talk about the affirmative defense and all that, well, that's going to get addressed in this next legislative session, hopefully. But to act like it's somehow different because it's in a school library and there's some, potentially good storyline or what have you, or it was written by a Black author, so we have to allow it, is just asinine. There are plenty of great Black authors that don't write obscene content.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand what the legal framework is for this decision and try to pull that out of these procedures. The legal framework that is actually in force right now also was enforced during the reconsideration of these books. Is the EFB local policy that was in force during the reconsideration of these books, followed by the administration.
Yes.
Is the EFB local policy, is it legal, Becca?
Yes. And certainly if there are
Is
changes.
the First Amendment a part of that EFB local policy that we have to respect in terms of any supporting documentation or law that's associated with the EFB local?
It's law you have to follow and you want to follow. And part of the First Amendment, just very briefly, time, place, and manner matters. What we say out loud in a public meeting that is available to the public is different than what a person reads in a book in the privacy of wherever they read their book, right? Context and medium matter a lot in the First Amendment context. And so the protections of what's in that book are going to be very high. That doesn't mean a student can go up to a person and say, quote, even quote that book, right? That's a different context with a different intent and not before you today.
So what I'm trying to understand is the First Amendment requirements that we have to pay attention to have to do with the fact that we are a public entity and the child is going to a resource that is a optional resource. If we pull a book out of that area, then we could potentially be violating a First Amendment right of that student.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just want to be very clear on that policy, or on that law.
That's it.
And we have confirmed that this is a voluntary resource. At any given time, has it been required or assigned as required to a student to the best of your knowledge?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
Okay, so I have a couple of follow-up questions. So, Ms. Davis, I really want to understand and kind of dissect the individual pieces that we have here. I hear you saying that we need to comply with the sexually explicit, sexually relevant definition, but my understanding is that's been enjoined. I hear you say that we need to comply with the obscenity definition, but that requires as a whole. It has to be evaluated as a whole. I hear you saying that we have to comply with the definition of harmful, which requires that it's dominant theme when taken as a whole. I hear you saying that our policy does not require or needs us to look at TSLAC, which I read is as a whole. I was also looking at case law on this subject, Campbell versus Tammany Parish, which was actually a precedent that was quoted as recently as 2 weeks ago from the Fifth Circuit. And that discussion in that case was that it needed to be evaluated as a whole. So everything that we've discussed today appears to be that we should be looking at the entirety of the text within the context. Is that also your understanding, or you would still purport that that needs to be different?
I feel like I've answered that question multiple times, and what I would say to you is, again, I've raised the issue of, please explain to me how books that have the extent and volume of vulgar language and vulgar themes and drug use and sex and rape and abortion and all those things, please explain to me how, taken as a whole, with the volume of content that they have, are somehow now not pervasively vulgar or harmful or obscene. Nobody has answered that question. And at this point, this board seems very intent on keeping these materials, and that's fine. That's your prerogative. It's concerning. I find it, quite frankly, abhorrent that some of this stuff is in school libraries. But if that's the decision y'all want to make as elected officials, that's fine. I mean, I don't know what else to say to convince you guys that this stuff is inappropriate for kids.
I think the second thing I want to make sure I understand is just the request that you're making in terms of relief, is that once that item has gone through the interim expedited review, that it should bypass the reconsideration process, right? Basically, it should just be gone, right? So the two things I want to clarify is that the TSLAC guidance requires us to have a reconsideration process. So I feel like your request is asking me to actually violate that law. And because the interim expedited review is only in part, and all the definitions that we discussed today are in whole, I feel like the request that you're asking of us is to violate law. So those two items I'm struggling to understand.
And on the reconsideration committee, I'm not suggesting you scrap that altogether. There could be situations where somebody submits a book and asks for that expedited interim review, and the district administrator and librarian feel like that standard hasn't been met, then you put that book through the reconsideration committee process. That's what we're suggesting, not to scrap it altogether. And your second question, I'm sorry, was what?
Well, the interim expedited review is only in part, which everything that we're reading today is that it needs to be in whole. So if we skip the reconsideration process and skip the review as a whole, I feel like that would be violating two tenets of the
And that's
administrative
not,
code.
your policy doesn't say that, though. The policy says the administrator can find in whole or in part that it meets those definitions.
That the board should consider a revision to EFB local to clarify these items.
I mean, if we can't, in terms of context and all that, if we can't read a book aloud in a meeting full of adults, then a child as young as 12 has no business reading it. I don't care what the context is.
Dr. Tinsley, are any of these 4 books available to a 12-year-old?
No, they are not.
14, okay, make it 14. What does it make a difference? I'm sorry. Like 13, and there are books that she has submitted that are in the middle school library,
Okay, but they're not the ones that we're talking about today.
but they are affected by the policy, and we may be back here in a month talking about those ones. But, I mean, are
And
14-year-olds really?
I just want to respond to that point. I'm not here to keep or remove these books. I'm here to see if the administration follows the policy that I helped vote on, and that the policy is clear, that it protects parents on both sides of the viewpoint. Because we were elected by the whole of the community, not one particular viewpoint or not. And my personal opinion as being conservative or not does not actually change the fact that we serve all students.
You do, absolutely, and you have a duty to protect those students from harmful material, and your policies aren't doing it.
So,
If there are new content questions that cover a different topic, I'd be happy to hear them. We're going through multiple iterations of the same questions. Are there any other points not made that you would like an opportunity to make at this time? The time is 11:02. The board has heard a level 3 appeal filed by Ms. Giles. The board, all right, if there are no more questions from the board, this concludes this proceeding. At this time, the board will adjourn into executive session pursuant to 551.071 of the Texas Government Code to consult with the board's legal counsel. The board will then reconvene into open session to take action, if appropriate, later in the meeting. Thank you very much for being here today, and we'll be back shortly.
Becca, is
right, the time is 11:49. The board has heard a Level 3 appeal filed by Ms. Giles. The board then adjourned into executive session pursuant to Section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code. Following executive session, the board has now reconvened in open session. In accordance with Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code, any action regarding this matter must be taken in open session. Do I have a motion on the Level 3 appeal regarding the book Unravel Me?
And I would remind the board of your obligation when you're reviewing the decision. First, you're looking at whether the district administration followed board policy EFB legal and EFB local. And then also your scope of review is not to substitute your judgment for that of the reconsideration committee, but to determine whether the substantial evidence of the was supported by the reconsideration committee's decision. And so just keeping those things in mind, again, this is not an endorsement of any viewpoint or ideology espoused in a particular view or particular book.
Oh, thank you for that. All right, do I have a motion on the Level 3 appeal regarding the book Unravel Me?
I move that the board deny the Level 3 appeal and uphold the prior decision at Level 2.
Second.
Motion by Marvin, second by Julie. There any discussion on the topic?
I have a few thoughts. Boards have policies, and EFB local is the policy that governs this hearing today, and it is a legal policy. Ms. Giles and the administration, both in this proceeding, admitted that they did follow the policy, that they affirmed that they did. The policy states that parents and guardians are the primary decision makers regarding their students' access to library, and we provide a convention in that policy to do so. Ms. Giles that option was available to Mrs. Giles, and it gave her the freedom to opt out of all 4 of these books for which she did not. I have a concern that we have one parent trying to make a choice for all of our parents. Legally, this book was reviewed as a whole, as required by law, by a committee that also followed the policy, which is why I put that motion forward.
Any other comments on the book?
I think the motion or the grievance was based on excerpts of the book and not the book as a whole. I believe that the grievance was based on the personal views of one person, and she's entitled to those beliefs. But as a board, we're not allowed to substitute our personal beliefs into this process. We are limited strictly to determining whether the board followed policy and whether there was evidence to support the review committee's determination. Again, I believe that this book was not checked out by the student of the parent who filed the grievance. I believe that despite having the opportunity to do so, the parent did not choose to opt out. And I believe that, children mature at different rates in terms of, their emotional status and their ability to glean learning lessons. And the parents of that child are the ones who are best situated to make those decisions. And so I think that also that the sexual explicit definition was struck down by the federal court in part as being unconstitutionally vague because it required an understanding of community standards for the entire state of Texas. And I think even in Lovejoy, it's hard to discern what our community standards are, because if you talk to one person, you're going to get one viewpoint. And if you talk to someone else, you're going to get another viewpoint. So that if I were to say my assessment of what our community standards are that parents make the decisions that are best for the unique circumstances of their family, and that's what they have the right to do. And I think we've given them the tools to be able to do that.
It's worth noting that from this point forward, based on our current policy, every kid is opted out of young adult fiction. Parents have to consciously make the decision to opt them in, and they still have the ability to opt out any specific titles. So at this point, until they've opted in, these books aren't available. But if families believe these books are available, then they would have the ability to do that regardless of how the vote goes for this particular book. Discussion? If not,
One comment, going back to Becca's instructions on what we're charged here today to do is making sure that our policy, we've been advised that our policy is legal, and we've been presented evidence, I believe, by both parties that our policy was followed. I want to thank the members of the community for coming to comment today, and I want to thank the members of the committees that spent many hours of their time to go through this process so that we could have clear evidence to make this decision today.
any other? All right, if not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All right, the motion is upheld, 7-0. Do I have a motion on the Level 3 appeal regarding the book, The Freedom Riders?
I move that the board deny the Level 3 appeal and uphold the prior decision at Level 2.
So move, Julie McLaughlin, second, Amy Smith. Any discussion?
I think I think to echo another board member said today, is these decisions are not easy. I certainly have wrestled with that on what is the right decision, and ultimately rely on the fact that the parents are the appropriate decision makers. These books do not meet the legal definition of pornography. They do not meet the legal definition of obscenity, which requires review as a whole. They do not meet the legal definition of harmful material, which requires that the dominant theme throughout the book as a whole be upheld. I have reviewed the Level 3 grievance, and the points that are being made, I do not believe were sufficiently proven today. So I do not believe these books are illegal to be on our shelves, and I don't believe that we were provided evidence that they are.
Any other comments?
Just reiterate for the record that our current policy will require parents to opt in for their children to access these materials, including this particular title. The parents will still have the ability on Freedom Riders to opt out if they choose to, okay?
So just to clarify with Mr. James, this book is not in the young adult fiction category, and so it would require an opt-out. Okay. Any other comments? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? The book, the relief is denied. The motion is upheld, 7-0. Do I have a motion on the Level 3 appeal regarding the book Concrete Rose?
I move that the board deny the Level 3 appeal and uphold the prior decision at Level 2. Concrete Rose.
So moved, Jason. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, Jeff Wood. Is there any discussion on this particular motion?
I think the evidence presented and Dr. Tinsley on this title and several others, and I think there was other discussion specifically about the literary merit in this book, and I think that the process was followed. I feel like there was no evidence presented to show that our policy was not followed, and that's the reason I made the motion.
I just want to reiterate, we're voting if they follow the board policy and if the reconsideration committee followed the policy, not necessarily if we each endorse this book.
All right, this is young adult fiction. Every student parent has to opt in for this book to be available. It's not available to any student at this point. And parents still have the right to opt out if they feel it's not appropriate for their child. All right, all those in favor of keeping or denying the relief pursuant to the motion, say aye. Opposed? All right, the motion carries 7-0. Do I have a motion on the appeal, Level 3 appeal regarding the book, The Poet X?
I move that the board deny the Level 3 appeal and uphold the prior decision at Level 2 for the Poet X.
So moved, Amy Smith. Do I have a second?
Second?
Second, Marvin Bobo. Is there any discussion on this motion?
Just to reiterate, we really strongly believe in parental choice. Each family knows what's best for their kids, and we just want to make sure people realize they can opt in or they can opt out. And again, back to Dr. Tinsley and the evidence of literary value and what these books have to offer, and public comment from students sharing their own experience. That's why I made the motion.
Any other?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate the point Julie made earlier, that specific to the Level 3 grievance, I don't believe we were presented evidence to support the grievance on this title either. And I think we have quite a bit of evidence presented to show that our policy was followed every step of the way.
And this book is young adult fiction. Every student is opted, a parent would have to opt in for it to be available, and they have the right to opt out. All right. All those in favor of the motion as presented, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. At this time, we'll retire to closed session to review the decisions with legal counsel. We will promptly adjourn once we return. There will be no other comments, but we will retire to closed session at this time.
you.